Introduction: Athens in the Golden Age. The setting: a city between myth and reality. Ancient Athens stands as one of humanity's most remarkable experiments in civilization. During its golden age in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, this city-state of perhaps 300,000 inhabitants became the birthplace of democracy, Western philosophy, drama, and architectural magnificence that still inspires awe today. Yet beneath the grand marble temples and political innovations lay something equally fascinating: the daily rhythms of ordinary life. The Athens we explore is not merely the Athens of Pericles, Socrates, and Phidias, though these towering figures walked its streets. Rather, it is the Athens of potters and fishmongers, of mothers weaving at their looms, of children playing in dusty courtyards, of slaves hauling water jars, and of farmers trudging in from olive groves at dawn. It is a city where the extraordinary and the mundane intertwined constantly, where a discussion of justice might unfold beside a fish stall, and where the same hands that voted on matters of war and peace also kneaded bread and tended goats. The Acropolis, that limestone outcrop rising 150 meters above the surrounding plain, dominated the cityscape, its temples gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. But the true heart of Athens beat in its winding streets, in the great open expanse of the Agora, in the workshops of the Kerameikos district, and in the countless modest homes where families lived, worked, loved, and died. Geography and climate: the Attic landscape. To understand daily life in Athens, one must first understand its physical setting. The city occupied the central plain of Attica, a roughly triangular peninsula extending into the Aegean Sea. Mountains ringed the region on 3 sides: Parnes to the north, Pentelikon to the northeast, and Hymettos to the east. These peaks, while not particularly high, created a sense of enclosure, of a world unto itself. The climate shaped every aspect of Athenian existence. Summers were hot and relentlessly dry, with temperatures often exceeding 35 degrees Celsius. The sun beat down from cloudless skies, turning the landscape golden and brittle. Winters brought relief: cooler temperatures, occasional frost in the valleys, and precious rain that replenished cisterns and brought life back to the parched earth. Spring and autumn were glorious, with mild temperatures and the brief flowering of wildflowers across hillsides carpeted in thyme, rosemary, and wild sage. Water was always precious. Unlike many ancient cities blessed with mighty rivers, Athens had only the modest Ilissos and Eridanos streams, which often ran dry in summer. The city depended on wells, springs, and an elaborate system of fountain houses and aqueducts. Every drop of water used in an Athenian household had been carried there, usually by women or slaves, in heavy clay jars balanced on heads or shoulders. The surrounding countryside of Attica provided Athens with its agricultural foundation. Olive groves covered the hillsides, their gnarled trees producing the liquid gold that formed the basis of the Athenian economy. Grapevines grew in terraced plots, yielding wine that ranged from rough and acidic to smooth and honeyed. Barley and wheat grew in the limited flat areas, though Athens could never feed itself from its own soil alone and depended heavily on grain imports from the Black Sea region. The sea, visible from the Acropolis on clear days, was Athens' highway to the wider world. The port of Piraeus, connected to the city by the famous Long Walls, brought goods from across the Mediterranean: grain from Egypt and the Crimea, timber from Macedonia, slaves from Thrace and Scythia, luxury goods from Persia and beyond. The sea also brought threats: Persian fleets, pirate raids, rival Greek navies. Life in Athens was always shaped by its position as both a land power and a naval empire. Temporal framework: a day, a year, a lifetime. The ancient Athenians organized time differently than we do. Their day began at sunrise, which varied considerably between winter and summer. The day was divided into 12 hours of daylight and 12 of night, meaning that a summer hour was considerably longer than a winter one. They lacked precise timekeeping devices. Sundials provided rough guidance, but most people regulated their activities by the sun's position and the daily rhythms of work and rest. The year followed both the solar cycle of seasons and a lunar calendar of religious festivals. Each month began with the new moon and lasted either 29 or 30 days. The year officially started in midsummer, though practical life followed the agricultural cycle of plowing, planting, and harvest. Religious festivals punctuated the year, from the great Panathenea honoring Athena to the dramatic festivals of Dionysus to harvest celebrations and mystery rites. A human lifetime in Athens, for those who survived the perils of infancy and childhood, might span 60 to 70 years, though many died younger. Age was measured not in birthdays, but in life stages: infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and old age. Each stage brought different roles, responsibilities, and social expectations. A boy became a citizen at 18, a girl typically married at 14 or 15, and old age brought both respect and diminishing physical capacity. Social structure: citizens, metics, and slaves. Athenian society was sharply stratified into three main groups, each with distinct rights, roles, and daily experiences. Citizens, politi, were the privileged minority, perhaps 30,000 to 50,000 adult males in the classical period. Only men born to Athenian parents on both sides could be citizens. They alone could vote in the assembly, serve on juries, hold political office, and own land in Attica. Citizens ranged from wealthy aristocrats owning vast estates to humble farmers scratching out a living on rocky hillsides. What united them was their participation in the polis, their obligation to serve in the military, and their identity as true Athenians. Metics, metokoi, were resident foreigners, Greeks from other cities, and non-Greeks who had settled in Athens. They might number 25,000 to 40,000, including families. Metics could not own land or participate in politics, but they played vital roles in commerce, manufacturing, and intellectual life. Many of Athens' finest craftsmen, wealthiest merchants, and most famous philosophers were metics. They paid special taxes and served in the military, but remained perpetual outsiders, unable to fully belong no matter how many generations their families had lived in Athens. Slaves, douloi, formed the largest group, perhaps 80,000 to 100,000 individuals. They came from many sources: prisoners of war, victims of piracy or kidnapping, children born to slave mothers, and people sold into slavery for debt or crime. Slaves performed every imaginable task, from brutal labor in silver mines to skilled crafts, from domestic service to tutoring children. Some were treated reasonably well, others horrifically. A few managed to buy their freedom, but most remained enslaved for life. This social hierarchy shaped every aspect of daily life: where you lived, what you ate, how you dressed, whom you could marry, what work you did, how you spent your leisure time, even how you walked down the street, all reflected your social position. To understand a day in ancient Athens is famous across the Greek world for its pottery, particularly the fine painted vessels featuring red or black figures depicting mythological scenes, athletic contests, and daily life. These are luxury exports shipped across the Mediterranean, but the bulk of what's sold here is humbler stuff: everyday vessels for cooking, storage, and dining. The merchant has brought several amphora of his own manufacture, carried here earlier by his slave. He's not a master potter creating fine art, he's a competent craftsman producing serviceable storage vessels. His amphora are sturdy and well-made, but undecorated, designed for holding wine or olive oil. He hopes to sell them to a wine merchant who needs containers for retail sales. He sets up his display, arranging his amphora to best advantage, and waits for customers. Between sales, he watches the passing crowd and thinks about his business. Competition is fierce. There are dozens of pottery workshops in Athens, and imported pottery from Corinth and other cities floods the market. To survive, he must maintain quality, keep prices competitive, and cultivate relationships with regular customers. The social life of the Agora. Among the stalls and stately marble stoas, philosophers and orators mingle with merchants and magistrates. In that covered walkway, a gentle shadow on a hot day, ideas and gossip circulate as freely as the breeze. Indeed, it was said the Agora was a marketplace for ideas, where neighbors debated politics and poetry as eagerly as they traded pottery and grain. The Agora was far more than a commercial center. It was the beating heart of Athenian democracy and social life. Citizens came here not just to shop, but to catch up on news, argue politics, conduct business, meet friends, and participate in the life of the polis. Under the shaded colonnades of the various stoas, men gather in informal groups.
Here, removed from the noise and bustle of the marketplace proper, conversations can be more sustained and serious. A group of young men surrounds an older philosopher, peppering him with questions about justice and virtue. Nearby, retired veterans debate the latest military news from the north, where Philip of Macedon is expanding his power. Businessmen discuss shipping contracts and mining leases. Politicians network and scheme, building alliances for upcoming assembly votes. The great Socrates, executed in 399 BCE, but still remembered vividly, had made the Agora his classroom. He would approach strangers and engage them in dialogue, using his famous questioning method to expose contradictions in their beliefs and push them toward clearer thinking. His student Plato wrote, "Socrates was always in public places, hanging around the Agora early in the morning, in the gymnasia, or in the marketplace when it was full." Though Socrates is gone, the tradition continues. Philosophers still haunt the Stoas, seeking disciples and debate. Some charge fees for their teaching, others, like Socrates, teach for free. The Cynics, radical philosophers who rejected conventional social norms, are particularly visible, often deliberately flouting propriety to make philosophical points. One might see Diogenes, if this is his era, living in a barrel, publicly mocking passers-by and claiming to search with a lamp for an honest man. Political activity in the Agora. The Agora was also the administrative center of Athenian democracy. Several important civic buildings bordered the square. The Bouleuterion housed the Council of 500, Boule, which prepared legislation for the assembly and handled day-to-day governance. The council met daily, except on holidays. Citizens served one-year terms, selected by lot, and could serve only twice in their lifetime. This system ensured broad participation, but also meant that Athens was governed largely by amateurs. The Tholos was a circular building where the 50-member executive committee of the council dined, and some even slept, ensuring that there were always officials available to handle emergencies. Dining at public expense was one of the few perquisites of Athenian office. Officials served without salary, though they received a small per diem to compensate for time away from their private business. The monument of the eponymous heroes featured statues of the 10 legendary heroes after whom the tribes of Attica were named. Public notices were posted here: upcoming assembly meetings, proposed laws, lists of young men called up for military service, notices of lawsuits, and more. Citizens regularly checked these notices to stay informed. The law courts were located around the Agora. Athens had no professional judges or prosecutors. Instead, large citizen juries, often 201, 501, or even more jurors, heard cases and rendered verdicts by majority vote. Any citizen could bring a prosecution, and both prosecution and defense spoke for themselves, though wealthy defendants might hire logographers, speechwriters, to compose persuasive speeches for them to memorize and deliver. This morning, several trials are underway. From one courtroom comes the sound of a litigant's voice rising in passionate argument. A crowd has gathered to listen. Athenian trials were public spectacles, and skilled orators drew audiences like entertainers. The litigant is accusing his neighbor of illegally diverting water from a shared well, and he's pulling out all the stops. Appeals to law, to custom, to the juror's sense of fairness, even to religious duty. The diversity of the crowd. The Agora attracts every sort of person. Our pottery merchant observes the passing parade. Country farmers who've walked hours to sell their produce, onions, garlic, leeks, cabbages, figs, grapes, olives. They look distinctly rustic, deeply tanned, speaking in thick rural accents that city dwellers mock. But they're proud of their status as citizens and landowners, the backbone of Athenian democracy. Wealthy aristocrats accompanied by slaves carrying parasols and folding stools. These men move with confident assurance, secure in their social position. They wear fine linen chitons and elaborately draped hematia, their grooming impeccable. Some sport perfectly trimmed beards, others are clean-shaven in the latest fashion. They pause to greet each other with elaborate courtesy, discussing horse breeding, their country estates, and politics. Metic merchants from across the Greek world and beyond. Phoenicians with curled beards and purple-dyed garments, product of their famous dye industry. Egyptians with darker skin and distinctive linen kilts, Thracians with elaborate tattoos, Scythian traders in trousers, shocking to Greeks who considered pants barbarian, Jews from the Levant, and Greeks from every city-state of the Mediterranean. Women are less common in the Agora than men, but they're present. Respectable citizen women generally avoided the marketplace, sending slaves or male relatives to shop for them. But poorer women had less ability to maintain such seclusion and could be seen buying food, selling produce from their gardens, or working as vendors. Foreign women and hetaira, courtesans, moved more freely in public spaces. Prostitutes ply their trade around the edges of the market.
Athens had a stratified sex industry, from expensive hetaira, who were cultured companions as well as sexual partners, to common brothel workers, to street prostitutes serving the poorest clientele. Prostitution was legal and regulated, taxed like any other business. Slaves are everywhere, on errands for their masters, working as assistants in workshops, carrying burdens, holding parasols, following their owners. Some slaves are highly skilled: scribes, accountants, craftsmen, even doctors. Others perform back-breaking labor. What unites them is their lack of freedom, their status as property. Yet in the bustle of the Agora, slaves interact with free people constantly, and observers couldn't always immediately distinguish slave from free based on appearance alone. A philosophical encounter. As our merchant waits for customers, an interesting scene unfolds nearby. A well-dressed young man, clearly from a wealthy family, given his fine clothes and cultured bearing, is being questioned by an older, plainly dressed man who has the look of a philosopher about him. "Tell me," the philosopher says, "you say you seek justice, but can you define justice for me?" The young man looks confident. "Justice is giving each person what they're owed." "Interesting. So if I borrow your sword and then go mad, would it be just for you to return it to me when I ask for it?" "Well, no, that would be dangerous." "But you said justice is giving each what is owed. I am owed my sword, am I not?" The young man frowns, realizing he's been trapped. A small crowd has gathered to listen, as often happened when philosophers deployed their dialectical skills in public. The merchant recognizes the technique. It's the Socratic method, made famous by the martyred philosopher and carried on by his disciples. This kind of public philosophical discourse was a distinctive feature of Athenian life. In what other city would abstract questions of ethics and metaphysics be debated in the marketplace alongside haggling over fish prices? The juxtaposition of high philosophy and mundane commerce, both occupying the same physical and social space, exemplified Athens' unique cultural synthesis. The regulation of commerce. The Agora was not an unregulated free-for-all. Athenian officials called agoranomai, market magistrates, patrolled the marketplace, enforcing standards and settling disputes. They checked weights and measures to prevent cheating, ensured that goods were properly displayed and described, and kept the peace when disputes arose. One such official approaches our merchant's stall. He's a citizen serving his annual term, selected by lot like most Athenian officials. He inspects the amphora, checking for cracks or defects that might be hidden from customers. Finding none, he nods approval and moves on. The agoranomai had significant powers. They could fine merchants on the spot for violations, confiscate fraudulent goods, and even bring charges against serious offenders. This official oversight helped maintain Athens' reputation for honest dealing, which was important for a city dependent on international trade. Beyond the agoranomai, other officials oversaw specific aspects of market life. The metronomai supervised weights and measures, maintaining standard samples against which all others were checked. The cytophilices regulated the grain trade, which was critical given Athens' dependence on imported wheat. Special harbor officials supervised the port of Piraeus, collecting customs duties and ensuring that proper procedures were followed. A sale and a conversation. A wine merchant approaches the pottery stall. He's a Metic, originally from Rhodes, who has built a successful business importing and selling wine. The two men know each other from previous transactions.
They greet each other warmly, though maintaining the formal courtesy appropriate to business dealings. They inquire after each other's health and families. They comment on the weather. It's been dry, which is good for ripening grapes, but hard on late vegetables. They discuss news from around the Greek world, rumors of war, reports of good harvests or failed crops, shipping news. Finally, they get down to business. The wine merchant needs amphora for a shipment of Chian wine he's just received. The pottery merchant's vessels are perfect for the purpose. They haggle over price. This is expected, almost ritual. To accept the first price would be insulting, suggesting the seller had overpriced or the buyer was a fool. After good-natured negotiation, they settle on a price, 6 drachmas per amphora for a bulk order of 20. The wine merchant counts out silver coins, Athens' famous owls, silver tetradrachmas bearing the goddess Athena on one side and her sacred owl on the other. These coins are recognized and accepted throughout the Mediterranean, the international currency of the age.
The transaction complete, they share a cup of wine from a nearby vendor, diluted with water, as proper, to seal the deal. The pottery merchant feels satisfaction. This sale will feed his family for weeks and leave something over to save or invest in expanding his workshop. Mid-morning in the Agora. By mid-morning, the Agora reaches its peak of activity. Every available space is filled with vendors, shoppers, gawkers, and loiterers. The noise level is extraordinary. One must shout to be heard over the general din. A herald climbs onto a platform and blows a trumpet to get attention. When the crowd quiets slightly, he announces upcoming public events. A meeting of the assembly in 3 days to debate a proposed treaty. Religious sacrifices at various temples. Upcoming dramatic festivals. People listen attentively. This is how most Athenians learned the news, through public announcements and word of mouth. Near the center of the Agora, a group has gathered around a storyteller, a professional entertainer who recites Homeric poetry from memory. His voice rises and falls dramatically as he performs a passage from the Iliad, describing Achilles' rage and Hector's death. The audience is rapt. These stories form the core of Greek cultural identity, known to everyone from childhood, but never losing their power to move and entertain. Elsewhere, a snake oil salesman, to use an anachronistic but apt term, has drawn a crowd with promises of miracle cures. He holds up bottles of mysterious liquids, claiming they can cure everything from impotence to plague. His patter is rapid and convincing, full of testimonials from satisfied customers, probably shills in the audience. Some in the crowd look skeptical, others are nodding, hands moving toward their purses. A beggar, one leg ending in a stump wrapped in dirty cloth, war wound or accident, sits by a column, wooden bowl before him. Passers-by drop in coins, bread, or fruit. Athens had no organized charity or social welfare, beyond occasional public grain distributions, but there was a strong ethic of personal charity, especially toward disabled veterans. The beggar's strategic location suggests he's been doing this for years. He knows the best spots and times. Philosophical schools and the life of the mind. At the edges of the Agora, in the shade of the Stoas, more structured philosophical teaching takes place. Several schools operate in or near the Agora, offering instruction in philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, and other subjects. The Sophists, itinerant teachers who charge fees for instruction in rhetoric and argumentation, are controversial figures. Traditional Athenians, like Aristophanes, mocked them as corrupting the youth, teaching clever arguments rather than truth. But they're also influential, as facility in public speaking is essential for success in democratic Athens. Young men from wealthy families flock to study with famous sophists, paying substantial fees to learn techniques of persuasion. In one corner, a sophist named Protagoras, if we imagine ourselves in his time, holds court, explaining to students his famous maxim, "Man is the measure of all things." What does this mean? That truth is relative? That each person's perception constitutes reality? Or something more subtle? His students debate the question, practicing the very skills of argumentation he's teaching them.
The Academy, Plato's philosophical school founded in 387 BCE, is located outside the city walls in a grove sacred to Athena. But Plato and his students often come to the Agora to observe and sometimes to teach. The Academy focuses on mathematics and abstract philosophy, seeking eternal truths beyond the changing world of the senses. The Lyceum, another school located just outside the walls, was founded by Aristotle in 335 BCE. Its approach is more empirical, studying the natural world through observation. Aristotle and his students are famous for walking while discussing philosophy, earning them the nickname Peripatetics, walkers. These schools represent Athens' commitment to intellectual life, the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. In what other city could a man make a living as a professional philosopher, supported by students' fees and wealthy patrons? Athens' prosperity, democratic culture, and respect for learning created a unique environment where philosophy flourished. The Agora as political theater. By late morning, political activity intensifies. It's 2 days before an assembly meeting, and various factions are already campaigning for their positions. A group gathers around a well-known politician. Let's call him Demosthenes, though this is a common name and may not be the famous orator. He's arguing passionately for a harder line against Philip of Macedon, who is threatening Greek independence in the north. His speech is polished, his gestures dramatic. He paints a vivid picture of what will happen if Athens doesn't act: loss of freedom, subjugation to barbarian rule, the end of democracy. His opponents are equally vocal. They argue that war with Macedon would be ruinously expensive, that Philip's intentions are peaceful, that Athens should focus on internal affairs rather than foreign adventures. They question Demosthenes' motives, suggesting he's in the pay of Athens' commercial rivals who would profit from conflict. The crowd listens to both sides, arguing among themselves. This is democracy in action, messy, noisy, sometimes irrational, but fundamentally participatory. Every citizen present will vote at the assembly, and many are still making up their minds. The marketplace becomes a forum for political education and persuasion. This open political debate, conducted publicly where anyone could listen and participate, was revolutionary in the ancient world. Most societies were ruled by kings, tyrants, or narrow oligarchies. Only in Athens and a few other Greek democracies did ordinary citizens regularly debate and decide major policy questions. Religious procession through the Agora. Suddenly, a religious procession enters the Agora, and the commercial bustle parts to make way. A group of priests and priestesses, wearing special ceremonial garments and wreaths, lead a decorated ox toward the altar of the 12 gods at the Agora's edge. Musicians play flutes and lyres, creating a solemn melody. Acolytes carry offerings, baskets of barley, wine in special vessels, honey cakes, and garlands of flowers. The ox, garlanded and probably drugged to keep it docile, walks calmly. If it were to resist or show distress, it would be a bad omen, and the sacrifice might have to be postponed. The crowd watches respectfully. Some join the procession. Others simply pause in their activities and bow their heads or raise their hands in prayer. The procession represents the entire community's relationship with the gods. The sacrifice benefits everyone, maintaining the pax deorum, peace with the gods, that allows the city to flourish. At the altar, the ox is sacrificed with practiced efficiency. The throat is cut, blood collected in vessels, and poured over the altar. Choice portions, thigh bones wrapped in fat, according to the custom established in myth, are burned, the smoke carrying the offering up to Olympus. The rest of the meat will be distributed, some to the priests, some to the sponsors of the sacrifice, some sold in the marketplace, ensuring nothing is wasted. This intersection of sacred and secular, with a religious ritual occurring in the midst of commercial activity, was natural to ancient Greeks. Religion wasn't separate from daily life, but woven through it, connecting every activity to the divine. Dawn in the Athenian household. First light, awakening in the andron. As dawn breaks, the Acropolis hill is bathed in soft golden light, and a light breeze carries the scent of damp earth and wild thyme. In the humble homes that cluster on the slopes below, families stir to greet another day. The typical Athenian house, whether grand or modest, turned inward, presenting blank walls to the street but opening onto an inner courtyard. This architectural choice reflected both the climate, creating shade and catching breezes, and cultural values emphasizing privacy and the separation of domestic life from the public sphere. Inside a typical Athenian courtyard house, a young mother awakens with her children. The night has been spent on simple beds, wooden frames with leather straps supporting thin mattresses stuffed with wool, straw, or dried seaweed. Wealthier households might have more comfortable bedding, but most Athenians slept simply, covered with woolen blankets in winter, lighter linen in summer. The house is still dim. Small windows set high in walls, designed to provide light while maintaining privacy, admit only weak early light. The air carries the cool, clean smell of the night, mingled with the lingering sense of yesterday's cooking fire and the ever-present aroma of olive oil. The household stirs. Servants and slaves begin their day. The low murmur of servants stacking clay lamps and stirring embers in the hearth blends with children shuffling feet on cool stone tiles. In a household wealthy enough to afford slaves, the domestic servants have likely risen even earlier than the family, before the first birdsong. A household slave woman, perhaps captured in a war years ago or born into slavery, moves quietly through the dark house. Her first task is to revive the fire. Greek houses lacked chimneys. Smoke from the central hearth simply rose through the roof or escaped through high vents. The hearth was more than a cooking facility. It was the spiritual heart of the home, sacred to Hestia, goddess of the hearth fire. Using a poker, the slave woman uncovers embers that have smoldered all night under ash. She adds dry twigs and gently blows, coaxing flames to life. The light flickers across plastered walls, perhaps decorated with simple painted designs or, in wealthier homes, with more elaborate frescoes. As the fire grows, she adds larger pieces of wood, carefully rationed as fuel was expensive in this largely deforested land. Another slave, perhaps a Thracian man, judging by his fair hair and tattoos, carries in water. He has already made several trips to the nearest fountain house or well, filling and refilling the household's large storage jars, pithoi. These ceramic vessels, sometimes taller than a man, hold the water supply for drinking, cooking, and washing. In summer, they might also contain wine, olive oil, and preserved foods. The water carrier's shoulders ache from the weight. Each trip means balancing a heavy hydria, water jar, on his shoulder or head, walking carefully over uneven streets, competing with dozens of other people at the fountain. It's hard, monotonous work, repeated multiple times every day, year after year. This slave, captured in a border skirmish 10 years ago, has long since given up thoughts of escape. Where would he go? His family is dead or scattered, his homeland a week's journey away. Children wake, the youngest members of the oikos. In the women's quarters, gynaikeon, children are stirring. In the central room, the loom's hum soon joins the morning chorus. Weaving wool was a daily rite and a symbol of identity tied to the goddess Athena herself. A young boy, perhaps 7 years old, opens his eyes. He sleeps in the same room as his mother and infant sister. His father sleeps separately in the andron when not entertaining guests. This separation of sexes within the household reflects the strong gender segregation of Athenian society. The boy sits up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His tunic, a simple rectangle of linen with holes for head and arms, has gotten twisted in the night. He straightens it, then stands on the cool floor. Terracotta tiles or packed earth, depending on the household's wealth, feel pleasant under bare feet. His mother is already up, nursing the baby while simultaneously watching the household's only other slave, an elderly woman, who is grinding barley on a stone quern. The repetitive scraping sound of stone on stone, grain slowly transforming into flour, is one of the characteristic sounds of morning in any Greek household. "Wash your face," the mother tells her son, gesturing toward the water basin. He dips his hands in cool water, brought from the fountain at dawn, and splashes his face. There's no soap. Instead, people clean themselves with olive oil applied and then scraped off with a curved bronze tool called a strigil, though that's typically reserved for after exercise. For morning washing, water alone must suffice. Personal hygiene and daily preparation. Athenian standards of cleanliness were different from ours, but not as primitive as often imagined. Women fetch water in clay jars from the household well or distant fountain, cleaning and sweeping swept courtyards. For bodily cleanliness, most Athenians bathed infrequently by our standards, perhaps once a week for a full bath. However, they washed hands, feet, and face daily, and used oil and scrapers after exercise. Wealthy households might have private bathing facilities, a simple room with a drain where slaves would pour water over the bather. Most people, however, relied on public bathhouses or simply washed at home with basin and pitcher. Teeth were cleaned with frayed twigs or fingers, sometimes with abrasive powders made from ground pumice or crushed bones. Breath fresheners included mint leaves, parsley, or anise seeds. Dental health was often poor. Skulls from this period show abscesses, cavities, and tooth loss, though perhaps no worse than many pre-modern populations. Hair care occupied considerable time, especially for women and girls. Long hair was the norm for women, often elaborately arranged with pins, ribbons, and fillets. Girls and women might spend considerable time combing and oiling hair, sometimes with perfumed oils. Men typically wore hair short, though styles varied by period and fashion. Beards were common, kept trimmed and neat, requiring regular attention with small scissors or razors. The mother in our household runs a comb, carved from boxwood, through her daughter's hair, working out tangles while the girl squirms impatiently. Oil gleams on the comb's teeth, helping to smooth and condition the hair while also discouraging lice, an eternal problem in close-quartered ancient households. Dressing for the day. Athenian clothing was simple but could be elegant in its simplicity. Fathers and older sons don linen chitons and leather sandals, slinging foldable cloaks over one shoulder as they step out the door. The basic garment for both men and women was the chiton, essentially a rectangle of fabric, linen for summer, wool for winter, fastened at the shoulders with pins or brooches and belted at the waist. Women's chitons were longer, reaching to the ankles, while men's came to the knee or mid-calf, depending on the activity and social context. The chiton's simplicity allowed for much variation in draping and pinning, and the quality of fabric and decoration could signal wealth and status. Over the chiton, men typically wore a himation, a large rectangular cloak draped over one shoulder, wrapped around the body. Learning to drape a himation elegantly was an art form. It could identify someone as cultivated and sophisticated, or mark them as a bumpkin unfamiliar with city ways. The himation also served as a blanket at night, a sunshade during the day, and a badge of citizenship. Slaves typically did not wear the himation. Women, when venturing outside, might wear a peplos, a heavier, more structured rectangular garment, or wrap themselves in a himation or veil. Respectable women were expected to keep themselves covered, though the degree of coverage varied by period, region, and individual family custom. Footwear ranged from simple leather sandals, the most common, to more elaborate boots or shoes. Many people, especially slaves and children, went barefoot much of the time, their feet developing thick calluses. The wealthy might own several pairs of shoes for different occasions. The poor might own one pair that had to last for years. In our household, the father, a modest merchant of pottery, owns 2 chitons, one for everyday wear and one finer garment for festivals and important occasions. He dresses in his everyday tunic, now softened and faded by many washings, and wraps his himation with practiced efficiency. His sandals, mended several times, are tied securely. He's ready to face the day. Morning prayers and household religion. Before leaving the house, before even breaking his fast, the merchant pauses at the small household shrine. Athens is a city woven tightly with faith. Travelers note that Athenians believe countless gods watch over every step and every sunrise, so an offering to the divine is as routine as a handshake. The shrine is modest, a small niche in a courtyard wall containing clay figurines of Zeus, Athena, and the household's protective deities. Fresh flowers from yesterday have wilted. The merchant's wife will replace them today. A small altar holds the remains of last night's offering, ash, and a few drops of wine. The merchant pours a libation, a small amount of diluted wine, onto the altar, murmuring a prayer for prosperity and protection. These household rituals, performed countless times each day across Athens, formed the foundation of Greek religious life. Religion was not primarily about belief or doctrine, but about maintaining proper relationships with the gods through offerings, prayers, and sacrifices. The household gods watched over every aspect of domestic life. Hestia protected the hearth fire. Zeus Hercaeus guarded the courtyard. Apollo Aguius stood at the doorway. Ancestors, too, were honored, their spirits believed to linger and protect their descendants. Neglecting these daily rituals could bring misfortune. Maintaining them earned divine favor and protection. For most Athenians, religion was fundamentally transactional. Give to the gods and they will give back. The purpose is practical and intimate. The temple is home to the deity, and the god is given daily offerings of food and drink from the harvest or the city's labors. This wasn't cynicism, but pragmatism, a worldview in which gods were powerful, capricious beings who needed to be placated and honored, but who could also be bargained with and reasoned with. The first meal, breaking fast. As the first meal of the day is prepared, roasted barley bread dunked in watered wine, perhaps with figs or olives, the mother ensures the children eat before running off to play in the sunlit courtyard. The Athenian breakfast, akratismos, was simple and light. Most people ate barley bread or porridge, perhaps supplemented with olives, figs, cheese, or onions. The bread was coarse, made from barley, which was cheaper than wheat and better suited to Attica's thin soils. It might be dipped in wine diluted with water. Drinking unmixed wine was considered barbaric and dangerous. The family gathers around the hearth or in the courtyard. There are no tables. People eat standing, sitting on stools, or reclining if wealthy enough to afford couches. Food is served on simple pottery plates or even on flat bread that serves as an edible plate. The bread comes fresh from yesterday's baking. In most households, bread was baked at home, a laborious process requiring kneading, shaping, and baking in a clay oven. Some neighborhoods had commercial bakers, and it was possible to buy fresh bread from market stalls. The smell of baking bread, that most primal and comforting of aromas, would have been a constant presence in Athenian streets, mingling with other scents of cooking, animals, and humanity. The merchant eats quickly, chewing the dense barley bread and washing it down with watered wine. His wife nurses the baby while keeping an eye on their son, who is more interested in playing than eating. The household slaves eat separately, receiving portions of the same food but after the family has finished. Breakfast is not a leisurely meal or a social occasion. It's fuel for the day ahead. The main meal, Dipnon, will come in the evening, when the day's work is done. Now, as the sun climbs higher and the city comes fully to life, it's time to venture out into the streets of Athens. Leaving the house, threshold between private and public. The merchant steps toward the door, passing from the inner world of family and household to the outer world of the polis. This threshold is both physical and symbolic, marking the boundary between the private realm, where women dominated, and the public realm, the exclusive domain of citizen men. At the doorway stands a small statue or marker of Apollo Aguius, the god who protects entrances and exits. The merchant touches it briefly, a gesture of respect and a request for protection on the journey ahead. Dust from the road rises with each footstep over sun-baked limestone. The street outside is narrow, unpaved, and irregular. Athens was not built on any orderly plan, but grew organically over centuries, houses added wherever space allowed, streets following the contours of the land and the needs of traffic. Some streets are wide enough for 2 carts to pass, many are barely wide enough for a single donkey. The morning sun already feels warm, though it's barely past dawn. It will be hot today, as it is most days in summer. The merchant adjusts his himation to provide shade for his head and shoulders and sets off toward the Agora. Morning routines and the rhythm of the city. The streets come alive. In the widening light, the city stirs to life. Fathers and older sons don linen chitons and leather sandals, slinging foldable cloaks over one shoulder as they step out the door. Dust from the road rises with each footstep over sun-baked limestone. A young carpenter might carry a sandal carved from oak. A scholar gathers rolled papyrus texts. Soon the streets fill with a quiet bustle. Farmers leading donkeys laden with amphora, fishermen carrying wicker crates of dried fish, and craftsmen unlocking their workshops.
The soundscape of morning Athens is distinctive and multi-layered. The shuffle and pad of bare feet and sandaled feet on stone and packed earth forms the bass note. Over this come the sharper sounds: donkeys braying, roosters still crowing from courtyard coops, dogs barking, the creak and rumble of wooden cartwheels on stone, the rhythmic clang from a blacksmith's shop opening for business. Human voices add another layer. Greetings called from doorway to doorway, a mother shouting at children to stay close, merchants already hawking their wares, old men grumbling about aching joints, slaves exchanging gossip as they haul water or sweep courtyards. The overall effect is of a community coming to life, thousands of individual actions combining into the daily resurrection of urban existence. The air smells of dust, animal dung, cooking fires, and the sharp, resinous scent of pine smoke. Sanitation in Athens was rudimentary at best. There was no sewer system. Waste was collected in chamber pots and thrown into the street or into designated dumping areas outside the city. Street cleaners, typically slaves, did their best to keep main thoroughfares passable, but side streets could be foul, especially in the heat of summer. Yet Athens was not the filthy, reeking place often imagined. The dry climate and intense sunshine helped sanitize organic waste. Regular rains in winter washed streets clean. Social pressure and civic pride encouraged people to keep their neighborhoods reasonably clean. And compared to the medieval European cities of a millennium later, Athens was positively hygienic, with abundant public fountains, public baths, and a culture that valued cleanliness and physical beauty. The flow of foot traffic. Our merchant joins the flow of foot traffic heading toward the city center. He passes all manner of people. Farmers leading donkeys laden with produce for market. Their faces are deeply tanned, their hands calloused, their clothing simple and coarse. They've walked for hours from their farms in the Attic countryside, starting before dawn to arrive when the market opens. Some drive small flocks of goats or sheep, the animals' bells tinkling, their hooves clattering on stone. Fishermen carrying their catch, fresh from the port at Piraeus. The fish hang from poles across their shoulders, still glistening. The smell is strong, but not unpleasant, the sea salt freshness announcing their wares. Cats trail hopefully behind, and housewives emerge from doorways to inspect the offerings and haggle over prices. Craftsmen heading to their workshops in various quarters of the city. A potter with clay-stained hands, a leather worker with tools hanging from his belt, a bronze worker whose face is permanently darkened by smoke and metal dust. These men are the backbone of Athens' economy, producing the goods that sustain daily life and fill export ships bound for markets across the Mediterranean. Slaves on errands for their masters. Some carry heavy loads, others hold parasols to shade their owners, still others walk with nothing but messages to deliver. Slavery in Athens was ubiquitous, but varied enormously in character. Some slaves were treated almost as family members, others were worked to death in mines or brutalized in workshops. Most fell somewhere between these extremes, living lives of limited freedom but also limited suffering, adapting as best they could to circumstances beyond their control. Metics are distinguishable by subtle signs: slightly different styles of clothing, foreign accents, certain occupations associated with non-citizens. A Syrian merchant with elaborately curled beard and dyed garments, a Carian stonemason speaking broken Greek with his fellows, a wealthy Milesian banker's representative wearing expensive jewelry that no Athenian citizen would display so ostentatiously. Citizens of all social classes, from wealthy aristocrats on horseback, rare in the crowded streets, to humble farmers to urban artisans. What distinguishes citizens is not wealth, but legal status, the right to participate in governance, and a certain bearing that comes from that privilege.
Even a poor citizen farmer held his head higher than a wealthy Metic merchant, secure in his place in the political community. Architecture of the streets. The buildings lining the streets present mostly blank walls to the passerby. Athenian domestic architecture was intensely private, in sharp contrast to the openness of the public spaces of the agora and sanctuaries. Houses were typically single-story structures, though some wealthier homes had a second floor. They were built of sun-dried mud brick on stone foundations, with wooden beams supporting flat or gently sloped roofs covered in terracotta tiles. The exteriors were usually whitewashed, though wealthier homes might have more elaborate facades. Every so often, a larger structure breaks the monotony. A public building, a sanctuary, a wealthy man's more elaborate house. These might have columns forming a porch, decorated pediments, or painted walls visible through doorways. But mostly, the streets present an austere face, saving magnificence for public spaces and interior courtyards. Street corners often featured small shrines, a simple stone altar dedicated to a local deity or hero, perhaps with a statue or relief carving. Passers-by might pause to offer a quick prayer or leave a small offering, a flower, a pinch of incense, a few grains. These neighborhood shrines tied the city together in a web of sacred geography, making every street corner a point of connection between mortals and gods. Public fountains, gathering places and necessities. Every few blocks, the merchant passes a public fountain house, crine. Women fetch water in clay jars from the household well or distant fountain, cleaning and sweeping swept courtyards. These fountain houses were essential infrastructure, providing clean water channeled from springs outside the city through aqueducts and underground pipes. The largest and most famous, the Enechronos, 9 spouts in the Agora, supplied much of the city's water needs. Even at this early hour, women and slaves gather at the fountains, waiting their turn to fill hydrias and amphorae. Fetching water was women's work or slave work. No respectable citizen man would be seen carrying water jars, though he might drink deeply from a fountain on a hot day. The fountain houses were social centers as well as utilitarian structures. Women who otherwise spent most of their time secluded in their homes could socialize at the fountain, exchanging gossip, news, and neighborhood information. Slaves could steal a few moments of conversation with others in their position, sometimes making connections that might lead to romance, friendship, or plans for escape. Our merchant nods to several women he recognizes, neighbors, though he does not know them well. Respectable women are supposed to avoid unnecessary interaction with men outside their families. The women wear head coverings, keeping eyes downcast, though he notices them whispering and giggling after he passes. What are they gossiping about? His wife's reputation, his business affairs, or nothing to do with him at all? In the close quarters of an ancient neighborhood, everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. Approaching the Agora. As the merchant walks, the streets become busier and more crowded. He's entering the central district, approaching the Agora, the great open marketplace that was the commercial, political, and social heart of Athens. The architecture becomes grander. Public buildings with painted facades and marble columns appear more frequently. The merchant passes the Thalos, a circular building where the executive committee of the council met and dined. He passes the old Bouleuterion, where the Council of 500 held its sessions. He passes the base of a statue of one of the Tyrannicides, Harmodius and Aristogiton, whose assassination of the tyrant Hipparchus was celebrated as the foundation of Athenian democracy, even though the historical reality was more complex. The street widens, and suddenly the merchant emerges into the vast open space of the Agora. Part 4. The Agora, Heart of Civic Life. First impressions, the marketplace opens. Many head toward the great open marketplace, the Agora, which thrums with early trade. A modern guide notes that Athenians would walk to the Agora, the heart of public life, to barter oil, wine, textiles, and more. The Agora of classical Athens was enormous, roughly rectangular, covering several acres, approximately 600 by 300 meters of open space, surrounded by public buildings and stoas. In the 5th century BCE, it was actively being developed and embellished with new buildings, colonnades, and monuments, funded partly by Athens' imperial tribute. By the time our merchant walks through it in the mid-4th century, it has reached its full architectural glory, though political power has begun to wane after defeats in the Peloponnesian War. 3 sides of the square are lined with stoas, long colonnaded buildings that provided shade from the relentless summer sun, shelter from winter rains, and space for shops, offices, and informal gatherings. These stoas were architectural marvels in themselves. The stoa poikile, painted stoa, stretched nearly 40 meters long, its interior walls decorated with elaborate painted panels by master artists depicting mythological scenes and recent historical battles, including Marathon, where Athens defeated the Persian invasion in 490 BCE. The Stoa of Zeus Eleutherius, dedicated to Zeus the Liberator, was another major structure with Doric columns and painted decorations. Socrates himself was famous for spending hours beneath the colonnades, questioning anyone who paused by the Stoa of Zeus.
The covered walkways were perfect for philosophical discourse, shaded from sun, protected from rain, acoustically conducive to conversation, and constantly populated by potential interlocutors. The royal stoa, Stoa Basileus, housed the office of the king archon, one of Athens' chief magistrates, and displayed Athens' laws inscribed on stone tablets where any citizen could read them. This public display of laws was a cornerstone of democratic transparency. The law belonged to the people, not to a priestly or royal elite who could manipulate secret knowledge. The center of the Agora is a vast open space, deliberately kept clear of permanent structures to serve as a gathering place for assemblies before the Pnyx became the primary assembly location, festivals, military musters, and the daily business of commerce. Already, though the day is young, the space is filling with temporary stalls, wooden frames covered with awnings, tables made from boards on trestles, baskets and amphora arranged on the ground. Merchants are laying out their wares with practiced efficiency. A fish seller arranges his catch on a marble slab kept cool by being shaded and occasionally splashed with water. A grain merchant guards his sacks of barley and wheat, precious commodities in a city that cannot feed itself from local production alone. A textile vendor hangs colorful fabrics from a wooden frame, the dyed wool and linen fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. An oil merchant positions his amphora carefully, each one sealed and marked with symbols indicating origin and quality. Animals are being led to designated selling areas, goats bleating nervously, sheep following docilely, a pair of oxen being examined by a farmer who needs new plow animals. The animal market occupies its own section, downwind from the main commercial area, but still busy with buyers and sellers negotiating prices, inspecting teeth and hooves, assessing the health and utility of livestock. The sensory assault of the marketplace. The sounds are overwhelming for someone coming from the relative quiet of residential streets. Merchants shout their wares in practiced, sing-song cries that carry across the square. Fresh fish from Piraeus, caught this morning, still gleaming. Honey from Hymettus, golden as the sun, sweet as ambrosia. Pottery from Corinth, finest in all Greece. Attic olive oil, pressed from the sacred groves of Athena herself. Buyers haggle over prices, their voices rising in mock indignation. 10 drachmas for that? I could buy an ox for 10 drachmas. Look at these olives, half of them are bruised. This wine is so sour it could strip paint. The verbal sparring is part ritual, part genuine negotiation, both buyer and seller knowing that the first price named is never the final price agreed. The sensory inserts are flawed, but they each play a significant role. Children cry, their voices piercing through the general din. A mother scolds her son for wandering too far. Dogs bark, strays hoping for scraps, guard dogs protecting their master's goods. Animals add their voices, goats bleating, sheep baying softly, chickens squawking from wicker cages, a donkey braying its complaint at being made to wait in the hot sun. Coins clink as transactions are completed. Athens has a sophisticated monetary economy based on silver from the mines at Laurion. The famous Athenian owls, tetradrachmas, bearing Athena's profile on one side and her sacred owl on the reverse, are recognized and accepted throughout the Mediterranean world.
The sound of silver coins being counted, clinked together to test their authenticity, false coins made of bronze with silver plating sound different, and dropped into leather purses is the constant percussion of commerce. The background hum is of hundreds of simultaneous conversations, merchants calling out, buyers questioning quality, friends meeting and exchanging greetings, old men arguing politics, young men boasting of athletic achievements, gossips sharing the latest scandals. Thousands of footsteps create a constant rhythmic undertone, sandals slapping on paving stones, bare feet padding on packed earth, the occasional clatter of a cart's wheels on stone. Street performers add their own sounds, a musician playing the aulos, hoping for coins in his bowl, a storyteller raising his voice dramatically as he recounts a tale from Homer, a snake charmer's strange hypnotic flute drawing a crowd. All these sounds layer together into the urban symphony of a great commercial center at work, a wall of noise that marks the Agora as the beating heart of Athens. The smells are equally intense and varied, assaulting the nose from multiple directions simultaneously. Fresh bread from several bakeries around the Agora's periphery, the yeasty, toasted grain aroma making mouths water. Grilled fish sizzling on small braziers at food stalls, the smoke carrying the distinctive smell of the sea mixed with olive oil and herbs.
Ripe fruit. Figs split open showing their red interiors. Grapes crushed accidentally underfoot, releasing sweet juice. Overripe melons that nobody bought yesterday, now starting to ferment in the heat. Animal sweat from the livestock area, a musky, organic smell mixing with the sharper stench of dung. Goats, sheep, cattle, and donkeys all contributing their own distinct notes to the olfactory assault. Human sweat too, hundreds of bodies pressed together in the Mediterranean heat, most people having bathed last several days ago, deodorant being unknown, the collective aroma of unwashed humanity in close quarters. Leather from the tannery district nearby and from goods being sold, sandals, belts, bags, armor straps, carrying the distinctive smell of tanned hide. Wood smoke from cooking fires, braziers, and the occasional burnt offering at one of the altars scattered through the Agora. Olive oil, its clean, slightly grassy scent pervading everything, used in cooking, lamps, personal hygiene, offerings to gods, and as a preservative. Wine, both the good and the very bad, its fermented grape smell mixing with the vinegar stench of wine that's turned. Spices from the east, cinnamon, pepper, frankincense, exotic and expensive, their rare fragrances marking the stalls of luxury goods merchants. Perfumes, both cheap and expensive, mixing floral and herbal scents, rose, lily, myrrh, saffron. The earthy smell of vegetables and herbs fresh from gardens, onions, garlic, leeks still showing soil on their roots, fresh basil and mint bruised by handling releasing their volatile oils. For someone with a sensitive nose, it's overwhelming, sometimes nauseatingly so. For the Athenian merchant, long accustomed to the Agora's assault on the senses, it's simply the smell of commerce, familiar and even comforting, the olfactory signature of prosperity and urban life. Market stalls and commercial zones. The Agora was not a random chaos of commerce, but had distinct zones for different types of goods, this organization arising partly from tradition, partly from official regulation. Fish were sold in one area, the Ichthyios market, located where it could be easily supplied from the road leading to Piraeus and where the inevitable fish smell wouldn't pervade the entire Agora. Bread had its own section, the baker's stalls clustered together so buyers could easily compare prices and quality. Pottery occupied another zone, metalwork another, textiles yet another. This organization made commercial sense. Buyers knew where to find what they needed, and merchants benefited from being near competitors, paradoxically, as a concentration of similar vendors drew more customers than a single isolated shop. It also made regulation easier. The agoranomai, market magistrates, could patrol specific areas, checking weights and measures, investigating complaints, and collecting taxes.
Our pottery merchant makes his way to the pottery section, navigating through the increasingly crowded Agora, exchanging greetings with acquaintances, stopping briefly to watch a juggler performing near the altar of the 12 gods, dodging a porter bent double under a load of amphorae, sidestepping a puddle of spilled wine. The pottery section occupies a prime location, visible from multiple approaches, near, but not too near, the fish market. Pottery and fish smell don't mix well. Close to the Panathenaic Way where the great religious processions pass. Here, dozens of vendors display their wares, the variety staggering even to someone in the trade. Simple clay cooking pots, blackened from use over fires, sturdy and utilitarian. Elegant craters for mixing wine and water at Symposia, some plain, others decorated with elaborate scenes of Dionysian revelry or athletic competitions. Amphorae of every size, from tiny containers for perfume to massive storage jars taller than a man. Hydriae, water jars with 3 handles, 2 for lifting, 1 for pouring, in various qualities from rough to refined. Kylix drinking cups, both the broad, shallow type for symposia and deeper cups for everyday use. Lamps, thousands of them, since every household needs multiple lamps and they're constantly breaking or wearing out. Simple, pinched clay lamps that cost an obol or 2, elaborately molded lamps decorated with erotic scenes or religious imagery costing 10 times as much. Braziers for heating and cooking. Roof tiles, both the curved pan tiles and the flat cover tiles, essential for any building but heavy and easily broken, requiring constant replacement. Clay figurines of gods and heroes, Athena in her armor, Zeus hurling a thunderbolt, Heracles wrestling the Nemean lion, purchased as votive offerings for temples or as household decorations. Toys for children, clay horses, dolls, rattles, even clay tokens and ballots used in various civic functions. And presiding over it all, in the finest shops, the true masterpieces, Athenian red figure and black figure pottery decorated by master painters. These vessels are works of art, their surfaces covered with intricate scenes from mythology, daily life, athletics, and warfare, executed with such skill that each figure seems alive, captured in motion, telling stories in clay and paint. These pieces are expensive. A large decorated crater might cost 50 drachmas or more, several weeks' wages for a laborer, but wealthy Athenians buy them for display, and they're exported throughout the Mediterranean, spreading Athens' cultural influence through commerce. The education of young Athenians. The education of young Athenians. After completing his business in the Agora, our merchant makes his way to a different quarter of the city. His young son, now 7 years old, has begun his formal education, and the father checks occasionally on his progress. Athenian education was private, not public. There were no state-run schools. Instead, families hired private tutors or sent their children to teachers who ran small schools. Education was expensive, limiting it largely to families of moderate or greater means. The poorest Athenians might learn a trade from their fathers, but received little formal education. Boys began their education around age 7. Girls, with few exceptions, remained at home, learning domestic skills from their mothers. This gender disparity in education both reflected and reinforced women's subordinate social position. The typical Athenian boy's education comprised 3 main elements. Grammata, letters, reading and writing, taught by a grammatistes, teacher of letters. Students learned the alphabet, then practiced writing on wax tablets with a stylus. They memorized and recited poetry, especially Homer, who formed the foundation of Greek cultural education. They learned to calculate with an abacus and to do basic arithmetic. Musicae, music, taught by a kitharistes, lyre teacher. Music education wasn't optional, but essential, considered crucial for moral development. Boys learned to play the lyre and aulos, a wind instrument, and to sing. They memorized songs and poems, developing rhythm, pitch, and memory. Music was believed to shape character, making boys harmonious in soul as in sound. Gymnasticae, physical education, taught by a paidotribes, athletics trainer, at the gymnasium or palaestra. Boys exercised, wrestled, ran, jumped, threw the discus, and javelin. Physical fitness was essential for military service, but also valued for its own sake. Greeks believed in developing the whole person, body and mind together. A day at school. The merchant's son attends a small school run by an elderly grammatistes named Apollodorus. The school occupies a single room in a modest building. With no desks or chairs, students sit on the floor or on stools they bring from home. About a dozen boys, ranging in age from 7 to 14, are present. They're divided into groups by ability rather than age. The youngest struggle with basic letters, while older boys read passages from Homer and practice writing. Apollodorus, white-bearded and patient, moves from group to group, correcting, encouraging, occasionally administering a sharp rap with his staff when a boy's attention wanders. Discipline is strict, corporal punishment is common, and considered necessary. The Greeks believed that children needed firm guidance, that natural inclination toward laziness and mischief must be beaten out. The room smells of wax from the writing tablets, olive oil used to waterproof the tablets and also applied to skin, and unwashed boyhood. It's warm. Sunlight streams through a high window, creating a bright square on the floor where dust motes dance. The youngest boys chant the alphabet, their voices rising and falling in sing-song unison. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta. They'll repeat this hundreds of times until the letters are permanently burned into memory. Older boys practice writing, styluses scratching on wax with a sound like mice in walls. One boy is copying a passage from Homer's Odyssey, carefully forming each letter. Writing is laborious. Literacy is valuable, but not universal, even among citizens. Many remain functionally illiterate throughout their lives, relying on professional scribes for writing needs. The most advanced students are reciting poetry from memory. Apollodorus has them stand and perform, critiquing not just accuracy, but delivery, posture, voice projection, expression. The ability to recite and perform poetry competently was expected of educated men. The role of the pedagogos. The merchant's son did not walk to school alone. He was accompanied by a household slave called a pedagogos, literally boy leader. This slave, usually too old or weak for heavy labor, serves as the boy's guardian, escort, and disciplinarian. The pedagogos waits outside the school, chatting with other pedagogoi while the boys study. When lessons finish, he'll escort the boy home, carrying his writing tablets and lyre, ensuring he doesn't dawdle or get into trouble. The relationship between boy and pedagogo was often close. After all, they spent every day together for years. Some boys loved their pedagogoi, like second fathers. Others resented their constant supervision. The pedagogos had authority to punish the boy for misbehavior, though ultimate authority rested with the father. This use of slaves in education might seem paradoxical. How could slaves teach free citizens about virtue and noble behavior? But Greeks didn't see the contradiction. Slaves could be educated and cultivated individuals, and their status didn't necessarily reflect on their character or abilities. Education was about transmitting knowledge and skills, which a slave could do as well as a free man. The gymnasium, training body and mind. Elsewhere, the boys and young men of the city train the body as the day warms. In a shady grove, the pale sand of the gymnasium, palaestra, is flecked with sunlight through olive trees. Bare-chested youths crouch to wrestle, throwing each other gently on the mats, or practice long jump pits in a swirl of sand. Others run laps around the perimeter, exerting themselves under watchful teachers. Athens had several gymnasia, large athletic complexes located outside the city walls, where there was space for running tracks, wrestling grounds, and groves of trees for shade. The most famous were the Academy, the Lyceum, and the Cynosargus. The gymnasium was more than an athletics facility. It was a social institution where young men trained, older men exercised to stay fit, and philosophers taught. In Athens, the gymnasium is more than a sports ground. It is a public place where philosophers could congregate for discussion as much as for athletics. Young men arrived in the morning after earlier lessons or chores. They stripped completely. Greeks exercised naked, the word gymnasium deriving from gymnos, naked. Nudity was natural and unremarkable in this context, though Greeks were usually modest in other settings. Before exercising, athletes rubbed themselves with olive oil. This served several purposes: protecting skin from the sun, making the body supple, and making wrestlers slippery. Part of the challenge of wrestling was getting and keeping a grip. The scent of sun-warmed wood and sandal straps mingles with dust and the occasional scent of olive oil rubbed on a sore calf. After exercise, athletes used bronze or iron strigils, curved scrapers, to scrape off the oil, now mixed with sweat and dust. They then washed with water, sometimes in cold plunge pools. The oil and dirt mixture scraped off was considered to have medicinal properties. It was collected and sold as a remedy for various ailments. Athletic training and competition. Training was supervised by professional athletics coaches, pedotribes, who taught proper technique and pushed students to excel. The training could be intense and even brutal by modern standards. Wrestling, pole, was the most prestigious sport, considered excellent preparation for the close quarters combat of battle. Wrestlers grappled, trying to throw their opponent to the ground. 3 falls won a match. Techniques included trips, holds, and joint locks. Biting and eye gouging were forbidden, but otherwise methods were rough. Boxing, Pigmachia, was even more brutal. Boxers wrapped their hands in leather straps, sometimes reinforced with metal. Matches continued until one fighter gave up or was knocked unconscious. Broken noses, cauliflower ears, and missing teeth were occupational hazards. Some specialized boxers became quite wealthy from competition prizes, but they paid a physical price. Pancration combined wrestling and boxing with almost no rules, a violent mixed martial art where almost anything except biting and eye gouging was permitted. Champions were feared and respected, their names famous throughout Greece. Running in various distances was practiced. The shortest race, the stadion, was 1 length of the track, about 200 meters. The diolos was 2 lengths, the dolichos up to 24 lengths. Runners competed naked on a dirt track, without starting blocks or sophisticated timing. Winners were determined by what judges could see. Long jump was practiced with hand weights, halteres, that jumpers swung to add momentum. Distances achieved seem short by modern standards, but the technique was different. It may have been more of a triple jump. Discus and javelin throwing developed skills useful in warfare. The discus was a flat, round stone or bronze disc. The javelin was a light spear. Form and distance were both judged. The social and philosophical life of the gymnasium. Aged philosophers may stroll nearby or lounge under colonnades, discussing ethics and rhetoric between exercise. The mingling of vigorous movement and thoughtful speech is natural here. Body and mind served with equal devotion. As the Greeks believed, shaping the body went hand in hand with shaping the soul. The covered colonnades, stoas, surrounding the exercise grounds provided shaded spaces for conversation, rest, and teaching. Here, philosophers held informal seminars, discussing ethics to cosmology. Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum were both associated with gymnasia, and this wasn't coincidental. Physical training and intellectual development were seen as complementary, both necessary for producing the ideal citizen. Young men would finish wrestling or running, scrape off their oil and sweat, and then join philosophical discussions, still breathing hard from exertion. The juxtaposition of physical and mental striving embodied Greek ideals of kalos kagathos, beautiful and good, the perfectly developed person, admirable in body, mind, and character. The gymnasium was also a place for socializing and networking. Friendships formed here often lasted a lifetime. Older men mentored younger ones, relationships that might be purely instructional, deeply emotional, or sometimes sexual. Greek attitudes towards same-sex relationships were complex and differed significantly from modern Western norms. with pedastery, relationships between adult men and adolescent boys, being socially acceptable within certain parameters, though still subject to regulation and social judgment. Each athlete pauses to sip from a wide goblet. Any respite is an invitation to debate. Groups gather around fountains or in the shade, discussing the issues of the day, upcoming assembly votes, philosophical questions, literary criticism, gossip about prominent citizens, athletic competitions. The ephebia, military training of young men. At age 18, Athenian citizens underwent 2 years of military training in the ephebia. This formalized the transition from boyhood to citizenship, combining military instruction with civic education. Ephebs, the young men in training, lived together in barracks, forming bonds that would last throughout their lives. They trained with weapons: spear, shield, sword, and bow. They learned formation fighting, the disciplined coordination required for hoplite warfare. They practiced forced marches, carrying heavy equipment over rough terrain. They stood guard at fortifications, experiencing the tedium and vigilance of military service. But the ephebia was about more than just military skills. Ephebs studied Athens' laws and constitution, visited important religious sites, and participated in civic ceremonies. They took an oath to defend Athens, to respect its laws, and to leave the city better than they found it. This oath, preserved in inscriptions, shows how deeply military training was integrated with civic identity. I will not disgrace these sacred arms, nor abandon my comrade wherever I am stationed. I will fight for things sacred and profane, both alone and with all. I will hand down my fatherland, not lessened, but greater and better than I received it. I will obey those in authority, and the laws presently in force, and those yet to be instituted. If anyone seeks to destroy or disobey them, I will prevent it, both alone and with all. I will honor the cults of my fathers. Witnesses are the gods: Agloris, Hestia, Enyo, Enyalius, Aris, Athena Area, Zeus, Phallo, Oxo, Hegemony, Heracles, and the boundaries of my fatherland. Completing the ephebia marked full admission to citizenship. Young men received a shield and spear from the state, symbolic of their obligation to defend Athens. From then on, they were liable for military service until age 60, expected to answer the call whenever war threatened. Religious life and temples. The omnipresence of the sacred. After this simple feast, many find cause to give thanks. Athens is a city woven tightly with faith. Travelers note that Athenians believe countless gods watch over every step and every sunrise. So an offering to the divine is as routine as a handshake. Religion permeated every aspect of Athenian life. There was no separation between sacred and secular, no distinction between religious and civic life. Every public act began with prayers and sacrifices. Every private household maintained daily religious observances. The calendar was structured around religious festivals. The city's very identity was bound up with its patron goddess, Athena. The Greeks were polytheists, believing in a complex pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with distinct personalities, domains, and relationships. At the top were the 12 Olympians: Zeus, king of the gods; Hera, marriage and family; Poseidon, sea; Demeter, agriculture; Athena, wisdom and warfare; Apollo, sun, prophecy, music; Artemis, hunt, moon; Ares, war; Aphrodite, love; Hephaestus, crafts; Hermes, trade, travel, communication; and sometimes Hestia, hearth, or Dionysus, wine, theater. Below the major Olympians were countless minor deities, heroes, personifications of abstract concepts, local spirits, and more. Every spring, grove, and hillside had its nymph. Every activity had its patron deity. Rivers were gods, as were winds. Abstract concepts like victory, Nike, and peace, Irene, were worshipped as divine beings. Daily religious observances. Often, a man or woman will stroll alone through marbled temenos or out to the roadside altars. A coin is dropped into Athena's temple treasury. A handful of barley is scattered on the altar of Poseidon or Apollo as a silent prayer. Religious practice was primarily about maintaining proper relationships with the gods through offerings and prayers. The logic was essentially transactional. Give to the gods, and they will give back. Neglect them, and disaster follows. Morning prayers at the household shrine have already been mentioned. But throughout the day, Athenians engaged in countless small religious acts. Pouring libations before drinking wine, offering the first fruits of a meal to the gods, swearing oaths by various deities, invoking divine protection before undertaking any significant action. Shrines and altars were ubiquitous. Every neighborhood had multiple small altars where passers-by might leave offerings. Crossroads were especially sacred, often featuring Hermes, stone pillars topped with the head of Hermes, patron of travelers. People passing these shrines might pause to touch them, leave a flower or food, or simply bow their heads in respect. The Great Temples.
At the great city temples, statues of Athena and other Olympians look on as wine is poured, flowers are laid, or a sweet incense ember smolders in a bronze bowl, each act a small bridge between mortal and divine. The Acropolis, crowned by the magnificent Parthenon, dominated Athens' sacred landscape. This rocky outcrop, rising 150 meters above the city, had been a sacred site since prehistoric times. By the classical period, it was covered in temples, altars, and monuments. The Parthenon, completed in 438 BCE, was Athens' greatest architectural achievement. Built entirely of marble from Mount Pentelicon, its Doric columns and elaborate sculptural decoration represented the peak of classical Greek art. The temple housed a massive chryselephantine, gold and ivory, statue of Athena Parthenos, created by the sculptor Phidias. The statue stood over 12 meters tall, Athena depicted in full armor, holding victory in one hand and a shield in the other. The Parthenon wasn't primarily a place of worship in the modern sense. Greeks didn't gather inside temples for services. Worship occurred at outdoor altars. The temple was the god's house, a treasury and monument more than a congregational space. Only priests and certain officials entered regularly. Ordinary citizens saw the great statue only on special occasions. The Erechtheion, another major temple on the Acropolis, had a more complex function. It housed the ancient wooden statue of Athena Polias, believed to have fallen from heaven, which was older and more sacred than Phidias's magnificent creation. The Erechtheion also contained shrines to Poseidon, Erechtheus, a legendary king, and other deities. Its famous caryatid porch, where columns in the shape of women support the roof, remains one of antiquity's most beautiful architectural features. Other temples crowded the Acropolis: the Temple of Athena Nike, Victory, celebrating military success, various smaller shrines, and treasuries filled with offerings from grateful worshippers and tribute from subject cities. Making offerings. The purpose is practical and intimate. The temple is home to the deity, and the god is given daily offerings of food and drink from the harvest or the city's labors. Thus, even a modest gift of wine or grain is meant to assure the goddess or god that they remain welcome and kindly. A wealthy merchant, having completed a successful trading voyage, might climb the Acropolis to offer thanks to Athena. He brings a valuable offering, an elaborately painted amphora filled with fine wine, or perhaps a silver fiale, libation bowl, or even a bronze statuette. He approaches the great altar outside the Parthenon, where priests maintain a constant fire. Other worshippers are present, each absorbed in private devotions. The merchant pours wine onto the altar, watching it sizzle on the hot stone, sending up fragrant steam. He murmurs his thanks, asking for continued protection of his ships and crews. A temple attendant, a slave or lower-ranking priest, approaches to receive the physical offering. Valuable gifts will be stored in the temple treasury, possibly displayed where other worshippers can see them, advertising the donor's piety and wealth. The merchant's name might even be inscribed on the offering, ensuring his gift is remembered. Poorer Athenians make humbler offerings, but with equal sincerity: a handful of barley grain, a fig, wildflowers, a tiny clay figurine purchased from a vendor outside the temple. The gods don't judge by monetary value, but by the spirit of the gift. Even the poorest citizen can maintain proper relationships with the divine. Animal sacrifice.
The most important religious ritual was animal sacrifice, thysia. Sacrifices marked every significant public and private occasion, before assembly meetings, before military campaigns, at festivals, after victories, to mark births and weddings and funerals, to seek healing or good fortune. The procedure followed strict protocols. The animal, usually cattle, sheep, goat, or pig, depending on the occasion and deity, was carefully selected, inspected for blemishes that might make it unacceptable. It was washed, decorated with ribbons and garlands, and led in procession to the altar. Participants washed their hands and maintained ritual purity. Barley grain was scattered on the altar and over the animal. Prayers were spoken, invoking the deity and explaining the purpose of the sacrifice. A knife that had been hidden in a basket was revealed, the moment of truth. The animal's throat was cut swiftly, blood collected in vessels and poured over the altar. Women present raised a ritual cry, ololaige, a high-pitched ululation marking the moment of death. The animal was quickly butchered. Specific portions, thigh bones wrapped in fat, burned on the altar, as the gods' share. The rising smoke carried the offering to Olympus. The remaining meat was distributed. Some went to priests as payment for their services.
Some went to the sponsor of the sacrifice. Much was cooked and eaten communally, turning a religious ritual into a social feast. For many Athenians, sacrificial feasts were their only opportunity to eat meat, which was otherwise expensive and rare in their diet. This combination of religious ritual and communal feasting bound the community together. Rich and poor, citizen and metic ate meat from the same sacrificed animal, united in their worship and their city. Festivals throughout the year. The Athenian religious calendar was crowded with festivals, ranging from small neighborhood celebrations to massive citywide spectacles. Some major festivals included the Panathenæa, held every summer in honor of Athena, was Athens' greatest festival. Every fourth year, the Great Panathenæa included athletic competitions, musical contests, and a massive procession to the Acropolis. A new peplos, robe, was woven for Athena's ancient statue, carried in the procession on a ship cart, then ceremonially placed on the goddess. The Parthenon's frieze depicts this procession in intricate detail: cavalry, chariots, musicians, animals for sacrifice, and citizens carrying offerings. The city Dionysia, held in early spring, featured dramatic competitions, the origin of Greek theater. Playwrights presented trilogies of tragedies plus a satyr play, competing for prizes. Other days featured comedy competitions. The entire citizen body attended, watching plays that explored profound moral and social questions through mythological stories. The Eleusinian Mysteries, held at Eleusis, involved secret initiation rites promising blessed afterlife to initiates. These mysteries were taken so seriously that revealing their secrets was punishable by death. We still don't know exactly what happened during the initiations, though it involved fasting, ritual purification, and experiencing something that participants described as profoundly transformative. The Anthesteria honored Dionysus with 3 days of wine drinking, flower festivals, and remembering the dead. One day, the Feast of Pots, involved leaving food out for ghosts and then telling them to leave, until next year. Out, Charis, the Anthesteria is over. The Thesmophoria was a women-only festival, honoring Demeter. Men were strictly excluded. For 3 days, women left their homes, camped together, fasted, and performed secret rites. This festival gave women rare freedom from male supervision and an opportunity for female bonding. Countless other festivals filled the calendar: the Thargelia, Pionopsia, Halcheia, Apaturia, and many more. A good portion of the year involved some kind of festival activity. While not every citizen participated in every festival, the cumulative effect was a society where religious observance was constant and central to identity. Mystery religions and personal piety. Beyond the public state religion, many Athenians sought more personal religious experiences through mystery cults. The Eleusinian mysteries were the most famous, but others existed: cults of Orpheus, Dionysus, the Kabiri, and various foreign deities. These mystery religions often promised things civic religion didn't: personal salvation, blessed afterlife, direct mystical experience of the divine. They appealed especially to those seeking deeper meaning than the transactional relationship with Olympian gods. Some Athenians were deeply devout, spending considerable time and resources on religious observances.
Others were more skeptical, going through the motions for social conformity but privately doubting the myths. The sophists and philosophers sometimes questioned traditional religion, arguing that the gods of myth were human creations, that true divinity must be more abstract and perfect. Yet even skeptics usually maintained outward conformity. Socrates was accused of impiety partly because his questioning seemed to undermine traditional religion. His execution in 399 BCE served as a warning. Athens might tolerate philosophical speculation in private, but public disrespect for the gods remained dangerous. Omens, oracles, and divination. Greeks believed the gods communicated through signs that could be interpreted by experts. Seers, Montes, read omens in bird flight, lightning, dreams, and the entrails of sacrificed animals. Before any major decision, military campaigns, business ventures, marriages, prudent people consulted seers. The most famous oracle was at Delphi, where Apollo spoke through a priestess called the Pythia. Athenians, like all Greeks, consulted Delphi on important matters. The oracle's responses were notoriously ambiguous, requiring careful interpretation. The famous consultation before the Persian invasion, when the Pythia told Athens to trust in wooden walls, was interpreted by Themistocles to mean the fleet, leading to the decisive naval victory at Salamis.
Other oracular sites existed: Dodona, where Zeus spoke through rustling oak leaves; Didyma, another site of Apollo; and the Oracle of Trophonius, where consultants descended into a cave for terrifying but illuminating experiences. Closer to home, people consulted local seers and interpreted dreams. Dream interpretation was a serious business, with professional interpreters helping people understand the gods' nocturnal messages. Some dreams were clearly divine communications, others were just mental noise. Knowing the difference required expert judgment. The marketplace and commerce, the economic foundations of Athens. Athens' prosperity rested on several foundations: silver mines at Laurion, agricultural production, especially olives and wine, manufacturing, particularly pottery, and trade. The city's port at Piraeus was one of the Mediterranean's busiest, ships arriving daily with grain from the Black Sea, timber from Macedonia, luxury goods from the East, slaves from various sources, and raw materials for manufacturing. The drachma, Athens' silver coin, was recognized throughout the Greek world and beyond. The famous owls, tetradrachms, bearing Athena's head and her sacred owl, were trusted for their consistent weight and purity. This reliable currency facilitated trade and made Athens a banking center. Banking itself was a private business, usually run by Metics. Banks accepted deposits, made loans, changed foreign currency, and verified coin authenticity. Some grew wealthy, though banking remained a risky business. No deposit insurance existed, and bank failures could wipe out depositors. The diversity of trade. Many head toward the great open marketplace, the Agora, which thrums with early trade. The variety of goods available in Athens was extraordinary, reflecting the city's far-reaching commercial networks. Food dominated trade volume. Grain was the most critical import. Athens couldn't feed itself from Attic soil and depended on Black Sea wheat shipped through the Hellespont. Any disruption to this grain supply threatened starvation. The state regulated grain trade closely, prohibiting hoarding and price gouging. Other foods included fish, fresh from Piraeus or dried or salted for preservation; cheese from local goats or imported from Sicily; olive oil. Athens exported more than it imported, oil being Attica's most important product; wine, local and imported, with Chian and Thasian wines considered finest; honey from Mount Hymettus, flavored by wild thyme; dried fruits, nuts, and garum, fermented fish sauce beloved throughout the ancient Mediterranean. Raw materials for manufacturing: metals, bronze, iron, tin; timber, Macedonia; papyrus, Egypt; dyes, purple from Phoenicia, others from various sources; leather, wool, and flax. Manufactured goods: pottery, Athenian red and black figureware was exported throughout the Mediterranean; textiles, wool and linen cloth, dyed and patterned; furniture, armor and weapons;
tools, luxury items like jewelry and perfumes. Slaves, a constant trade, with slaves arriving from wars, pirate raids, and breeding. The slave market was a regular feature of commercial life, where human beings were examined, bargained over, and sold like any other commodity. A day in the market. Stepping away from the civic center, one might wander toward the famous Potter's Quarter north of the city walls. In Kerameikos, the clay-rich riverbanks draw craftsmen and pottery wheels. Here, the afternoon air carries the rhythmic thump of wheel rims turning, and, in one traveler's vivid recounting, even potters singing to themselves as they worked over their wheels. Terracotta vases, urns, and lamps take shape under skilled fingers. The Kerameikos district, from which our word ceramic derives, was famous for pottery production. Workshops line the streets, each with its own kiln, wheel, and workspace. The process of creating pottery was labor-intensive and skilled. Clay was dug from riverbanks, cleaned of impurities, and kneaded to proper consistency. Potters shaped vessels on wheels, turned by foot or by an assistant. The potter's wheel was actually a heavy turntable that maintained momentum. The potters shaped clay as it spun, using tools and practiced hands to create forms ranging from tiny perfume flasks to huge storage jars. After shaping, pots dried. Then they were decorated, either by painting in black or rat figure technique, or left plain for utilitarian vessels. Finally came firing in kilns that might reach 1,000 degrees Celsius, a delicate process requiring precise control of temperature and atmosphere to achieve desired colors and finishes. Master potters and painters signed their work, becoming famous throughout Greece. Names like Exekias, Euphronius, and Duris were recognized brands. Their vessels commanded premium prices. Their works depicted mythological scenes, athletic competitions, symposia, daily life, providing modern scholars invaluable windows into ancient Greek culture.
But most potters were humbler craftsmen, producing everyday wares: cooking pots, storage jars, roof tiles, lamps, cups. This was hard, steady work that provided a living but rarely wealth. The sounds and smells of commerce. Nearby, merchants call out in high-pitched voices along the Dipnon street, selling wheat bundles, goats, and olive oil in amphorae, hawking bread and figs from covered carts. The soundscape is a tapestry of creaking cartwheels on pebbled roads, the caw of crows above, and the clinking of coins. The marketplace assaults the senses. Vendors cry their wares in sing-song chants. Fresh fish, fresh from Piraeus, see how their eyes shine. Bread, hot bread, buy my barley cakes. Oil, finest oil from Attica's blessed trees. The shouts blend into a constant roar of commercial entreaty. Animals add their voices. Sheep bleating, goats braying, chickens squawking in wicker cages, dogs barking, cats yowling over scraps. The animal market is especially loud and pungent, with the smell of dung mixing with human sweat and cooking smoke. Smells range from pleasant to overwhelming: fresh bread baking, fish grilling, wine fermenting, perfumes and incense, but also rotting vegetables in the heat, animal waste, open drains, and the particular funk of a crowd of people in a pre-deodorant age. Just outside the walls, slaves stretch to unload amphorae of salted fish from ships, while city guards stand quietly on watch. Life here is as dynamic as in the heart of the city. People of every class rub elbows in the Kerameikos crossroads, as merchants hawking their wares pass by tombs and temples, a reminder that Athens is both home and marketplace to all. The area around the city gates was particularly busy, as travelers and traders entered and exited. Guards checked for smuggling and collected taxes on goods. The Dipylon Gate, the main entrance from the northwest, saw constant traffic: farmers with produce, merchants with imports, envoys from other cities, travelers and tourists, soldiers departing for or returning from campaigns. Retail versus wholesale. The marketplace included both retail vendors selling directly to consumers and wholesale merchants dealing in bulk. The wholesale trade centered on the harbor at Piraeus rather than the Agora, where merchants met ship captains, inspected cargoes, and negotiated large purchases.
Retail vendors in the Agora might be the producers themselves, farmers selling their own olives, craftsmen selling their pottery, or intermediaries who bought from producers and resold. Profit margins were slim, competition fierce. Success required good location, quality products, fair prices, and personal relationships with regular customers. Wholesale merchants dealt in larger volumes and greater risks. A merchant might contract to buy an entire ship's cargo of grain, reselling it to bakers and households, or invest in a trading voyage, financing a captain to sail to distant ports, hoping the cargo would return with enough profit to cover costs and provide a return.
Maritime trade was especially risky. Ships might sink in storms, be captured by pirates, or find markets glutted when they arrived, prices too low to cover costs. But successful voyages could be very profitable. Some Menetic merchants grew quite wealthy through trade, though they could never own land or achieve full citizenship no matter how rich they became. Women in the marketplace. As previously mentioned, respectable citizen women were expected to avoid the marketplace, shopping through male relatives or slaves. But this ideal wasn't always reality, especially for poorer families. Working-class women sold produce from their gardens, bread they had baked, garlands they had woven. Some ran small shops or worked as vendors. Widows without male relatives might have no choice but to engage in trade. Foreign women and slaves worked more freely. A woman might run a tavern, manage a shop for her owner, or work as a prostitute, prostitution being legal and taxed. These women lacked the respectable status of secluded wives and daughters, but had more freedom of movement and action. The marketplace also featured female entertainers, musicians, dancers, acrobats. Some were slaves, owned by entrepreneurs who rented out their services. Others were free women making a living however they could. Athens' entertainment district, though exciting and profitable, was morally ambiguous. Men frequented it freely. Respectable women gave it a wide berth. Craftsmen and artisans. The workshop economy. Much of Athens' economic activity occurred in small workshops, ergasteria, scattered throughout the city. These ranged from one-man operations to larger establishments employing dozens of slaves. A typical workshop was a single room opening onto the street, perhaps 20-30 square meters. The craftsman lived above or behind his shop with his family. His tools hung on walls or stood ready on workbenches. Raw materials and finished goods filled shelves and corners. When business was slow, he might sit in the doorway, working and watching the street, calling out to potential customers. Crafts included metalworking. Blacksmiths forged tools, weapons, and hardware. Bronze workers cast statues and decorative items. Silversmiths created jewelry and precious vessels. The work was hot, dirty, and required considerable skill. A skilled metalworker might earn a comfortable living. His slaves and apprentices did the hardest, most dangerous work. Leatherworking. Tanners produced leather, a process involving soaking hides in urine and other chemicals, pounding and scraping, then treating with oils. The smell was notorious. Tanneries were typically located downwind of residential areas. Leather workers then crafted sandals, belts, bags, armor, and other goods. Textile production. Spinning thread and weaving cloth was primarily women's work, done at home, but commercial textile workshops existed, often employing slave women. Fullers' shops cleaned and finished cloth, another process involving unpleasant chemicals, including urine as a cleaning agent. Carpentry and woodworking. Furniture makers, shipbuilders, and construction workers kept busy in a growing city. Wood was expensive. Attica was largely deforested, so much was imported. Skilled carpenters could command good wages. Stoneworking. Masons and sculptors carved the marble and limestone that gave Athens its monumental architecture. Some were renowned artists. Most were anonymous laborers cutting blocks and carving moldings. The work was skilled but grueling, in all weather, producing permanent achievements at the cost of aching muscles and early arthritis. The life of a craftsman. A typical craftsman's day began at dawn. After morning prayers and a light breakfast, he opened his shop, often unfolding wooden shutters that served as awnings during the day and security at night.
If he employed slaves or free workers, they arrived early, ready for the day's tasks. The craftsmen might assign tasks, or everyone might know their roles from routine. Apprentices, often the craftsmen's sons or boys from other families learning the trade, helped with simpler tasks while learning skills. Work continued until midday, when the heat and hunger demanded a break. The midday meal was eaten in the shop or in the shade of a doorway, simple food that could be eaten quickly. Then back to work until late afternoon, when the failing light made close work difficult. Some craftsmen closed their shops then, heading home for the evening meal and rest. Others continued working, or socialized with neighbors, or ventured to the Agora for news and gossip. The rhythm varied by trade, season, and individual preference. Slavery in the workshop. Many workshops relied heavily on slave labor. A pottery workshop might have a free citizen master and several slave workers who actually produced most of the pottery. The master supervised, handled sales, and maintained relationships with customers. The slaves did the physical work. Treatment of workshop slaves varied. Some masters worked alongside their slaves, treating them almost as partners. Others were harsh taskmasters, extracting maximum labor for minimum cost. Much depended on the master's character and the slave's skills. A highly skilled slave might be valued and well treated, while unskilled laborers were easily replaced. Some slaves eventually bought their freedom, either saving wages, yes, some slaves received small wages beyond room and board, or convincing their masters to free them. Manumission, freeing a slave, was not uncommon, though freed slaves remained socially inferior, classified as metics rather than citizens. The most horrific slavery occurred in the silver mines at Laurion, where thousands of slaves toiled in hellish conditions, digging ore from narrow tunnels deep underground. Life expectancy was short, conditions brutal. The silver that financed Athens' glory was extracted at terrible human cost. Guilds and professional organizations. Unlike medieval Europe, Athens had no formal guild system regulating trades. But informal professional associations existed. Craftsmen worshipped together at shrines dedicated to their patron deities, Hephaestus for metalworkers, Athena for weavers, etc. They might help each other during hard times, share information about suppliers and customers, and socialize together. These associations reinforced professional identity and provided some mutual support, but they lacked the regulatory power of later guilds. Athens' economy was more laissez-faire than many ancient cities, with relatively few restrictions on who could practice which trades. Midday meals and dining culture. The Ariston, midday meal. By noon, the sun is high, and most people take pause for the Ariston, a light midday meal. Families reconvene indoors or in their shaded courtyard. Perhaps a father and children share a humble tray of coarse barley bread dipped in olive oil and wine, surrounded by bowls of ripe olives, sweet figs, and fresh goat cheese. The Ariston was a simple, utilitarian meal, fuel for the afternoon rather than a social occasion. Most ate at home, though workers far from home might eat in the field or at their workshop. Typical Ariston foods included bread, artos, the staple of the Greek diet. Most was made from barley, maza, which was cheaper than wheat but coarser and less palatable. Wheat bread, sitos, was more expensive, a sign of prosperity. Bread might be flat or leavened, fresh or stale. Stale bread was dipped in wine or water to soften it, or broken up in soup. Olives, preserved in brine or oil, were ubiquitous. Olive trees grew well in Attica's thin soil and Mediterranean climate, and their fruit provided both food and oil for cooking, lighting, and hygiene. Cheese, tyros, usually from goat or sheep milk, ranged from soft and fresh to aged and hard. It was nutritious, preserved well, and could be eaten alone or grated over other foods. Figs, sikon, both fresh in season and dried for year-round availability, were sweet treats in a diet where sugar was unknown and honey was expensive. Garlic, onions, and leeks were eaten raw or cooked, flavoring bland foods and, it was believed, providing strength and health. Fish and seafood, when available, might appear at midday, though more often at the evening meal. Small fish were cheap, larger fish and shellfish were luxuries. Meat was rare in most diets, appearing mainly at festivals when sacrificial animals were eaten. The poor might go weeks without meat. The wealthy could afford it more often, but still didn't eat it daily as we do. A servant might even bring a stew of lentils or greens on special days, but meat is almost never offered midday. Soups and porridges made from lentils, beans, or greens were filling, cheap, and nutritious. They could simmer on the hearth fire while people worked, ready to eat when hunger struck. The importance of wine. Wine, oinos, was the universal beverage drunk at every meal. But Greeks never drank wine straight. That was considered barbaric, something only Scythians and other uncivilized peoples did. Instead, wine was mixed with water, typically in ratios of 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, or even more diluted for everyday drinking. The wine was rough and acidic, often needing water to be palatable. It might be flavored with honey, herbs, or spices. Different regions produced different wines, with certain vintages and origins being prized. A merchant might boast about serving Thasian or Chian wine to his guests, the way a modern host might mention a vintage Bordeaux. Water alone was less commonly drunk, partly because water quality was often suspect. Water's alcohol content helped kill bacteria, making it safer than untreated water. Public fountains provided relatively clean water, but household cisterns and wells might be contaminated. Dining postures and customs. For the simple midday meal, people ate quickly and informally.
There might not be tables. Food was held in hands or placed on flatbread that served as an edible plate. The air smells of toasted grain and warm cheese. Even the city's stray cats have gathered to lick crumbs from sunlit steps. Scavenging animals were ubiquitous in ancient cities. Dogs, cats, rats, mice, birds, all competing for scraps of human food. People were accustomed to their presence, even if they weren't always welcome. After eating, the family might rest briefly. Siesta was common in summer's heat, or immediately return to work. The main meal, Dipnon, wouldn't come until evening, after the day's work was done. Diet and nutrition. The typical Athenian diet was nutritionally adequate but monotonous by modern standards. Grains, mainly barley, provided most calories. Olive oil added fat and calories. Vegetables, fruits, cheese, and occasional fish or meat provided variety and protein. Nutritional deficiencies probably occurred, especially among the poor. Vitamin C from fruits and vegetables was adequate in season, but might be lacking in winter. Protein was less abundant than in modern Western diets, though legumes, cheese, and occasional fish helped. Iron deficiency was likely common, especially among women. On the other hand, this diet was low in sugar and processed foods, high in fiber, moderate in fat, mostly healthy olive oil, and emphasizing whole grains and fresh produce. When adequate in quantity, it was probably healthy. To understand these divisions and how they structured every human interaction, the theater and cultural life. The origins of Greek theater. As afternoon glides toward evening, Athens seems to slow. In the great theater of Dionysus, some seats may already be filling for a play by Euripides or Aristophanes. Soon, the broad steps will fill with citizens lit by torchlight, awaiting tragedy and song. Greek theater originated in religious festivals honoring Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and transformation. From ritual dances and songs grew formal dramatic performances that explored the deepest questions of human existence: justice and revenge, fate and free will, duty to family versus duty to state, the nature of the gods and their relationship to humanity. By the classical period, dramatic performances were major civic events. Athenians ended their days with drama, quite literally. Theater wasn't entertainment, it was civic education, religious ritual, and catharsis. The Theater of Dionysus. The main theater occupied the south slope of the Acropolis, seating perhaps 15,000 to 17,000 spectators, a significant portion of Athens' adult male citizen population. The theater's design was elegant and functional, curved rows of stone seats, eventually, earlier they were wooden, rising up the hillside, providing excellent sightlines and acoustics. The circular orchestra, performance space, at the bottom, featured an altar to Dionysus, reminding everyone of the theater's religious origins. Behind the orchestra stood the scaena, a building serving as backdrop, storage for props and costumes, and changing room for actors.
The skena's facade represented a palace, temple, or other location, with doors through which characters entered and exited. The skena's roof provided a raised platform for gods to appear, the origin of Deus ex machina, God from the machine, when divine intervention resolved otherwise intractable plots. Attending a performance. Theater attendance was a civic duty and privilege. During the major dramatic festivals, the City Dionysia and the Linnea, the assembly didn't meet and most business ceased. Athens devoted itself to watching, discussing, and judging plays. Admission was cheap, 2 obols, about a day's wage for a laborer, and the state provided subsidies, the thorica, so even the poorest citizens could attend. This was democracy in action, the entire citizen body experiencing art together, contemplating shared values and challenges. Audiences arrived early to secure good seats. Theater was first come, first served, though certain seats were reserved for priests, officials, and distinguished citizens. They brought cushions, stone seats were hard, food and wine for the long day, performances ran from dawn to dusk, and prepared for an intense experience. Theater audiences were rowdy by modern standards. They cheered favorite actors, hissed and booed bad performances, threw food at actors they disliked, and sometimes rioted if particularly offended. Performances were competitive, playwrights vied for prizes, and audiences took sides, vocally supporting their favorites. The plays. Tragedy. Greek tragedy explored profound themes through mythological stories. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides took familiar myths, Agamemnon's return and murder, Oedipus's terrible fate, Medea's revenge, and crafted them into powerful dramas examining human nature, divine will, and the possibilities and limits of human action. Tragedies followed certain conventions. Unity of action. The plot focused on a single main action, avoiding subplots and digressions. Limited time and place. The action typically occurred in a single location over the course of a single day. Chorus. A group of performers, 12 to 15, who sang and danced, commenting on the action, providing background, and representing collective responses. Masks. Actors wore large masks indicating their characters, allowing a few actors to play multiple roles by changing masks. All male casts. Women's roles were played by men, as was true of all Greek theater. A typical tragic trilogy, playwrights presented 3 tragedies plus a comic satyr play, might run from sunrise to early afternoon. The experience was emotionally exhausting, watching heroes grapple with impossible choices, suffer terribly, and sometimes achieve a kind of redemption through suffering. Take Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. The audience watches Oedipus, king of Thebes, investigate a plague afflicting his city, only to discover that he himself is the cause. He has unknowingly killed his father and married his mother, fulfilling a prophecy he tried desperately to avoid. His anguished recognition, his self-blinding, and his exile evoked profound emotions, pity for his suffering, fear that similar fates might await anyone, and a sense of catharsis, emotional purification through experiencing these intense feelings in a safe, artistic context. The plays. Comedy. After the weighty themes of tragedy, comedy provided release and laughter. Aristophanes, the most famous comic playwright whose works survive, wrote biting satires of Athenian politics, society, and culture. Old comedy, as Aristophanes' style is called, was raunchy, absurd, and topical. Plays featured exaggerated costumes, including large leather phalluses for comic characters, scatological humor, sexual jokes, fantastic plots, and savage mockery of real named individuals. In The Clouds, Aristophanes mercilessly satirized Socrates, depicting him as a sophist running a thinking shop where he taught young men to make bad arguments appear good. The play was funny, but also vicious, contributing to negative perceptions that would eventually lead to Socrates' trial and execution. Lysistra imagined Athenian women going on a sex strike to force their husbands to end the Peloponnesian War, a plot both absurd, as if women had such power, and pointed, perhaps they should. The play's combination of sexual humor and serious anti-war sentiment exemplified comedy's ability to address serious issues through laughter. Comedy was licensed transgression during festivals honoring Dionysus, god of transformation and liberation. Normal social rules loosened. Politicians were mocked, sacred cows punctured, alternative possibilities imagined. Then the festival ended and normal life resumed, tensions released through laughter. The social function of theater. Theater served multiple functions in Athenian society. Religious, performances honored Dionysus, maintaining proper relationships between city and god. Educational, plays explored ethical dilemmas, historical events, some tragedies dramatized recent history, and mythological traditions that defined Greek cultural identity. Political, tragedies often engaged with contemporary political issues obliquely through mythological parallels. Comedies addressed politics directly, satirizing leaders and policies. Social, theater brought the community together, reinforcing collective identity. Watching plays was a shared experience that created common reference points for discussions and debates. Emotional, theater provided catharsis, allowing audiences to experience intense emotions safely. Tragedies' pity and fear, comedies' liberating laughter, both served psychological needs. Acting and production. Actors were professionals, usually citizens, who trained for years to master their craft. They needed powerful voices that could project to thousands without amplification, physical presence that could convey character through large masks, and the ability to play multiple roles, since only 2 or 3 actors performed all speaking parts, changing masks and costumes to play different characters. Famous actors became celebrities, traveling between cities to perform, earning substantial fees. The best were honored with crowns and public recognition. Acting competitions were as important as playwriting competitions. The chorus required less individual skill, but good coordination. Chorus members sang, danced, and moved in unison, creating visual and auditory spectacle. Wealthy citizens served as chorego, chorus producers, financing costumes, training, and performances as a public service. Production values were high. Costumes were elaborate, masks expertly crafted, stage machinery for flying effects, rolling platforms revealing interior scenes, sophisticated. The theater was a visual and auditory spectacle, not just literary drama. Dramatic festivals.
The 2 main dramatic festivals were the City Dionysia, late March, the major festival, featuring processions, sacrifices, and dramatic competitions over several days. Playwrights presented new works, no revivals, except occasionally of especially famous plays. Prizes were awarded to Best Playwright, Best Actor, and Best Choregos. The Linnea, January, a smaller festival, also featuring dramatic competitions. Comedy was more prominent here than at the Dionysia. These festivals drew visitors from across the Greek world. Ambassadors from allied cities attended, bringing tribute that was publicly displayed, a reminder of Athens' power and prestige. Theater was not just art, but also political spectacle, displaying Athens' cultural sophistication and imperial reach. Evening Symposia. The Dipnon, evening meal. As shadows lengthen, Athenian families gather for the Dipnon, the main meal of the day. This is more substantial than breakfast or lunch, though still modest by modern standards. The meal might include barley porridge or wheat bread, vegetables, cabbage, onions, garlic, leeks, beans, lentils, cheese and olives, fish if affordable, occasionally meat, especially if leftovers from a sacrifice, fruit for dessert, figs, grapes, apples, pears, wine diluted with water. The family eats together in the andron, men's quarters. Women and children might eat separately, especially in wealthier, more traditional households. Slaves eat after the family has finished, receiving portions of the same food. Eating postures varied by wealth and formality. The poor sat on stools or the ground. The wealthy might recline on couches, in the style that became standard for formal dinners. The Symposion, a male social institution. Elsewhere, as shadows lengthen at home, a wealthy household may be preparing for a symposium by evening. Servants carry couches outdoors under a vine trellis, and men recline to drink diluted wine from decorated cups. The Symposion, drinking party, was a distinctive Greek social institution, central to elite male culture.
These gatherings, Zexpat Athenians note, are lively social institutions, social gatherings involving drinking, music, and philosophical discussions. Symposia followed formal patterns. Preparation. A room, also called the andron, was prepared with couches around the walls. Each couch accommodated 2 men, who reclined on their left sides, leaving right hands free for eating and drinking. Small tables were placed before each couch, holding food and wine. The Dipnon. First came the meal proper, with various dishes served. Conversation during this phase was light and social. Libations and Prayers. After eating, slaves cleared the tables. Wreaths of flowers or leaves were distributed to guests. A libation was poured to the gods, with prayers for the evening's success. The symposion proper. Now began the drinking party. A symposiarch, party leader, was chosen, often by lot. He determined how wine would be mixed, the ratio of water to wine, and how drinking would proceed. Sometimes drinking was competitive, with challenges to drain cups quickly. Other times, more moderate. Entertainment. As the wine flowed, entertainment began. This might include music, hired female musicians, slaves or prostitutes playing aulos, lyre, or singing. Dancing, professional dancers, sometimes performing acrobatically. Poetry, guests reciting Homer, Sappho, or contemporary poets, or composing improvised verses. Games, word games, riddles, physical challenges like kotabos, flinging wine dregs at a target. Philosophical discussion, serious debates about ethics, politics, metaphysics. Sexual entertainment, hetairae, courtesans, or younger slaves providing companionship and sex. Soft music of stringed lyres drifts in the air as friends debate philosophy or recite poems late into the night. Gentle laughter mingles with the clink of amphora placed on marble altars at their feet. By the flicker of oil lamps and the glow of wax candles, guests pass jugs of wine and share honey cakes, continuing friendships and teaching one another wisdom in this intimate evening ritual. The culture of the symposion. Symposia were exclusively male spaces. Respectable women never attended. Their presence would be scandalous. The women present were entertainers and prostitutes, there to provide pleasure but not treated as equals. This homosocial environment allowed frank discussions of topics inappropriate in mixed company: politics, philosophy, sex, gossip about other citizens. Symposia were where alliances were forged, conspiracies planned, intellectual positions debated, and social bonds reinforced. The drinking could be heavy. While wine was diluted, consumption over many hours led to significant intoxication. Drunkenness was expected, even encouraged. Dionysus, god of wine, presided over symposia.
But there was drunkenness and drunkenness. Losing all control was shameful, but achieving a pleasant state of inebriation was the goal. Plato's Symposium, one of his most famous dialogues, depicts an idealized symposion where Athens' intellectual elite, Socrates, Aristophanes, Alcibiades, and others, discuss the nature of love. While undoubtedly literary fiction rather than historical record, it captures the symposion's intellectual possibilities. Men of education and wit, lubricated by wine, exploring profound questions. Homosexuality and the symposion. Same-sex relationships, particularly between adult men, erastes, lovers, and adolescent boys, eromenos, beloved, were part of symposium culture. These relationships were complex, governed by social rules and expectations. The ideal was that an older man would mentor a younger one, teaching him about virtue, politics, and culture, while also engaging in a romantic and sexual relationship. The younger partner was expected to eventually outgrow this role, becoming an adult citizen who might then mentor younger men himself. In practice, these relationships varied widely. Some were genuinely caring and educational, others were exploitative. Some involved sex, others remained chaste. Society regulated them through complex rules about appropriate ages, behavior, and duration.
Women's same-sex relationships also occurred, but left fewer traces in sources written by and for men. Sappho's poetry from Lesbos, describing love between women, was famous, but evidence for similar relationships in Athens is scarce. The Symposion's dark side. Not all symposia were elevated philosophical discussions. Many devolved into drunken revelry, komos, raucous processions through streets, singing and banging on doors, property destruction, sexual assault. Young aristocrats, drunk and feeling invincible, might commit acts they would never consider sober. The famous mutilation of the Herms, sacred statues, in 415 BCE, someone went through Athens systematically vandalizing these religious monuments, was widely believed to have been done by drunk young aristocrats returning from a symposium. The scandal nearly derailed Athens' military expedition to Sicily. Symposia reinforced class divisions. Only wealthy citizens could host them, and invitations signaled social status. Exclusion from symposium networks could damage political careers and social standing. Alternative social spaces. Not all Athenian socializing occurred at elite symposia. Common citizens gathered in taverns, at barber shops, in workshops, and in public spaces. These gatherings were less formal, more egalitarian, but no less important for creating social bonds. Taverns served wine and simple food, providing space for conversation, gambling, and entertainment. They were rougher spaces than refined symposia, frequented by workers, sailors, soldiers, and other ordinary men. Barber shops served as informal social clubs where men gathered to talk while waiting for haircuts. A skillful barber knew all the neighborhood gossip and could be a valuable source of information. Certain workshops or street corners became regular gathering spots where friends met daily. These informal networks were just as important as formal institutions for maintaining social cohesion and circulating information. Women's lives in Athens. The ideal of female seclusion. Athenian women's lives were constrained by powerful norms of female seclusion and subordination. The ideal, articulated by male writers and enforced by male authority, was that respectable women should remain indoors, rarely seen by men outside their families. Xenophon, in his Economicus, presents this ideal. The gods made woman's nature for indoor work and man's for outdoor. It is better for a woman to stay inside than to be out of doors. Pericles, in his famous funeral oration, recorded by Thucydides, said, "The greatest glory for a woman is to be least talked about among men, whether in praise or criticism." The physical architecture of houses reinforced this ideal. The gynaikaion, women's quarters, was typically on an upper floor or in a rear area, separated from the andron, where men entertained guests. Women spent most of their time in these interior spaces. The reality, class differences. But ideals and reality often diverged. The extent of female seclusion depended heavily on class and economic circumstances. Wealthy women of citizen families could most closely approximate the ideal. They had slaves to shop, fetch water, and run errands. They need not work outside the home. Their seclusion was a status symbol, advertising their family's wealth and respectability. Middle-class women experienced more limited seclusion. They might have one or two slaves, but still needed to work. They supervised household production, managed resources, and sometimes worked alongside slaves at tasks like weaving. Poor women could not afford seclusion. They worked selling in markets, gleaning in fields, working as wet nurses or midwives, doing laundry, or laboring in their husbands' workshops. Survival required their economic contribution, even if it compromised ideals of respectability. Metique and slave women were not expected to be secluded. They worked in various occupations, moved freely in public spaces, and interacted with men. Their freedom of movement was not liberation, but necessity and reflected their lower status. The household economy. Managing an Athenian household was complex, skilled work. Women were responsible for textile production, spinning thread from wool or flax, weaving cloth on upright looms, making clothes for the family. This was constant, time-consuming work. Wealthy households produced fine textiles that could be sold or given as gifts.
Poor households struggled to keep everyone clothed. In the central room, the loom's hum soon joins the morning chorus. Weaving wool was a daily rite and a symbol of identity tied to the goddess Athena herself. Athena was patron of weaving, and skill at the loom was a mark of feminine virtue. Food preparation: grinding grain, baking bread, preserving foods, cooking meals. This required knowledge of techniques, seasonal availability, and family preferences. Household management: supervising slaves, allocating resources, maintaining supplies, ensuring the household ran smoothly. In wealthier families, this was complex management requiring intelligence and organizational skill. Childcare: bearing and raising children was women's primary role. Maternal mortality was high. Perhaps 10% of women died in childbirth, but most women survived multiple pregnancies. They nursed infants, wet nurses were used by wealthier families, cared for young children, and raised daughters to be capable housewives. Religious duties: women had important roles in many religious festivals and maintained household religious observances. They wove the peplos for Athena's statue, participated in the Thesmophoria and other women-only festivals, and served as priestesses in certain cults. Marriage and women's lives: girls typically married at 14 to 15 to men in their late 20s or 30s. Marriages were arranged by families, with fathers selecting husbands for their daughters. The couple might never have met before the wedding. Marriage was primarily about producing legitimate heirs. Love might develop, but it wasn't the foundation of marriage. A man's emotional and intellectual companionship often came from other men, or from hetairai, not from his wife. A wife's primary duty was bearing sons to continue the family line. A woman who failed to produce children, especially male children, might be divorced or see her husband take a second wife, technically illegal, but sometimes practiced. Wives had no independent legal status. They were under the authority of their kyrios, male guardian, their father before marriage, their husband after. They could not own property, except through complex legal arrangements, make contracts, or represent themselves in court. Divorce was possible, but asymmetrical. A man could divorce his wife simply by sending her back to her father, though he had to return her dowry. A woman seeking divorce needed her kyrios to represent her and had to prove serious grounds, like abuse. Women's spaces and communities: despite restrictions, women created their own communities and spaces for socializing. At fountains, women gathering water could socialize, exchange news and gossip, and escape household confinement briefly. At religious festivals, women-only festivals like the Thesmophoria allowed women to gather without male supervision, camping together, performing secret rites, and bonding. At neighbors' homes, women visited female neighbors, especially relatives, creating networks of mutual support. At funerals, women played central roles in funeral rituals, mourning the dead with elaborate laments. These occasions brought women together in emotionally intense contexts. These female networks were important for emotional support, practical help, and the transmission of female knowledge about childbirth, childcare, medicine, and household management. Exceptional women: a few women achieved public recognition despite normative restrictions. Priestesses held important religious positions. The priestess of Athena Polias was one of Athens' most prestigious religious offices, held by a woman. Hetairai, courtesans, were educated, cultured women who provided intellectual companionship and sexual pleasure to elite men. Unlike respectable wives, hetairai were expected to be charming conversationalists, musicians, and witty companions. Famous hetairai, like Aspasia, Pericles' partner, wielded significant influence. Poets: Sappho, though from Lesbos rather than Athens, was recognized as one of history's greatest poets. Female poets were rare but not unheard of. Philosophers: a few women studied philosophy. Pythagoras accepted female students, and some later philosophical schools were more open to women. But these were exceptions. Most women lived lives of domestic labor, subordinated to male authority, their achievements unrecorded because they occurred in the private sphere that history largely ignores. Slavery and social structure: the ubiquity of slavery.
Slavery was fundamental to Athenian society and economy. Perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of the population were slaves. They performed every imaginable task, from the most skilled to the most brutal. Sources of slaves included war captives. Defeated enemies were commonly enslaved. Athens' many wars provided constant supplies of war captives. Piracy and kidnapping. Pirates raided coastal villages, kidnapping people to sell in slave markets. Even Greeks might be enslaved this way, though enslaving fellow Greeks was considered questionable. Birth. Children born to slave mothers were slaves, creating a self-reproducing slave population. Exposure. Infants exposed by their parents, a common form of population control and disposal of unwanted children, might be rescued by slave traders and raised as slaves. Debt. In earlier periods, Athenians could be enslaved for debt, but Solon's reforms abolished this practice. However, non-citizens might still be enslaved for debt. Trade. Professional slave traders bought and sold human beings across the Mediterranean, like any other commodity. Categories of slaves. Slaves' experiences varied enormously, depending on their work, owner, and circumstances. Domestic slaves worked in households, cooking, cleaning, childcare, and personal service. Treatment varied from harsh to almost familial. Some were valued members of households, others were brutalized. Agricultural slaves worked on farms, tending crops and animals. This was hard physical labor, but perhaps not the worst slavery. Some agricultural slaves lived relatively independently, paying their owners a portion of their production. Craft slaves worked in workshops, producing pottery, textiles, metalwork, and other goods. Skilled craft slaves were valuable and might be treated well. Some eventually bought their freedom with saved earnings. Commercial slaves worked in shops, markets, and businesses. Some ran businesses on behalf of their owners, managing complex commercial operations. Mine slaves endured the worst conditions. Silver mining at Laurion was brutal, dangerous work. Slaves were chained, worked long hours in cramped underground tunnels, and died young from accidents, disease, and exhaustion. This was slavery at its most horrific. Public slaves belonged to the state rather than individuals. They worked as clerks, accountants, road workers, and even as police. The Scythian archers who kept order in Athens were public slaves. These slaves often had better conditions than privately owned slaves. Treatment of slaves. Ancient sources rarely record slaves' experiences and perspectives. We see slavery through owners' eyes, in documents recording purchases, sales, and property inventories. Legal protections for slaves were minimal. Owners could beat slaves, imprison them, sell them, or even kill them, though killing was unusual and might attract social disapproval. Slaves could not testify in court except under torture, a practice reflecting assumptions that slaves would lie unless compelled by pain to tell truth. Yet some owners treated slaves relatively well, especially valued household slaves. Close relationships could develop. Some slaves were educated, even becoming tutors to their owners' children. The pedagogo, who accompanied boys to school, was typically a trusted household slave. Manumission, freeing slaves, occurred but wasn't common. Freed slaves, apoluthori, became metics rather than citizens, remaining socially subordinate but gaining legal freedom and ability to own property. Resistance and agency. Slaves weren't passive victims. They resisted in various ways. Open rebellion, rare, because punishment was severe and success unlikely. But slave revolts occurred occasionally, especially during wartime when external enemies might aid rebels. Running away. Some slaves fled, though without identity papers or safe destinations, staying free was difficult. During the Peloponnesian War, thousands of Athenian slaves fled to Spartan forces occupying Attic territory. Sabotage. Slaves might work slowly, accidentally break things, or otherwise resist subtly. Negotiation. Slaves with leverage, rare skills, trusted positions might negotiate better treatment or work toward manumission. Building communities. Slaves created their own communities, friendships, and even families, though slave families had no legal protection and could be separated by sale. Philosophical attitudes toward slavery. Greek philosophers struggled with slavery's morality. Aristotle infamously argued that some people were natural slaves, lacking the rational capacity for self-government, and therefore properly subordinated to others. This convenient theory justified existing practices, but wasn't universally accepted. Others were more skeptical. The Cynics argued that conventional distinctions of status were meaningless. What mattered was virtue, which slaves could possess as easily as freemen. Some Stoics, though this philosophy developed after the classical period, would argue that all humans possess divine reason, and that slavery was contrary to nature.
But philosophical criticisms rarely translated into practical change. Even philosophers who questioned slavery's morality owned slaves and participated in slave societies. The economic and social foundations of Greek civilization rested on slave labor, and few imagined alternatives. Politics and democracy. The Athenian democratic system. Athens invented democracy, demokratia, rule by the demos, the people, creating a system where ordinary citizens directly governed themselves. This was revolutionary in a world of kings, tyrants, and oligarchies. Key democratic institutions included the assembly, ecclesia. All male citizens over age 18 could attend and vote. The assembly met regularly, 40 times per year by the 4th century, on the Pnyx Hill, a flat area with a speaker's platform where thousands could gather. The assembly decided major policy questions: war and peace, treaties, laws, public spending, honors, and punishments. The Council of 500, Boule, prepared the assembly's agenda and handled day-to-day administration. Members were selected by lot from the 10 tribes of Attica, serving one-year terms. This system ensured broad participation. Most citizens likely served on the council at some point in their lives. The law courts, dicasteria, large citizen juries, 201, 501, or more, heard cases. Any citizen could bring prosecution. Both sides spoke for themselves. Jurors voted immediately after hearing arguments without deliberation. This system prevented elite domination of justice and ensured that ordinary citizens' values shaped legal outcomes. Magistrates, various officials, archons, strategoi, etc., handled specific administrative and military functions. Most were selected by lot for one-year terms, could serve only once or twice, and were strictly accountable. Election was used only for positions requiring expertise, especially military commanders, strategoi. Participation and citizenship. Athenian democracy demanded active participation. Citizens were expected to attend assembly meetings, serve on juries, hold office when selected by lot, and participate in festivals and ceremonies. Democracy wasn't just a form of government, but a way of life. Attendance at assembly meetings fluctuated. Important debates might draw 6,000 or more citizens, routine business far fewer. A quorum of 6,000 was required for certain critical votes. Payment for attendance, introduced in the late 5th century, helped ensure adequate participation. Jury service was paid, 3 obols per day in the 4th century, making it attractive to poorer citizens who couldn't afford unpaid public service. Critics complained this created professional jurors who served constantly, skewing justice toward the poor. But this was partly democracy's point, including all citizens, not just the wealthy. Office holding by lot seems bizarre to modern sensibilities. Why select important officials randomly? But this reflected democratic ideology. Any citizen was capable of serving. Expertise wasn't necessary and might be dangerous, enabling elites to monopolize power. And random selection prevented campaigning, corruption, and the formation of permanent political classes. Political life in the assembly. Assembly meetings were lively, sometimes chaotic affairs. Thousands of men gathered on the Pnyx, sitting on the bare hillside or bringing cushions. The meeting began with religious rituals, prayers and sacrifices, then proceeded to business. The council's proposals were presented. Citizens could speak for or against, propose amendments, or suggest entirely different approaches. Any citizen could address the assembly, though in practice, experienced politicians and skilled orators dominated debates. Voting was usually by show of hands, judged by eye. For critical decisions, more formal methods were used. Ostracism, for instance, involved citizens writing names on potsherds.
If 6,000 voted, the person receiving most votes was exiled for 10 years. Debate could be vigorous, even violent. Speakers were sometimes shouted down, interrupted, or even physically attacked if they said unpopular things. The crowd could be swayed by eloquent speeches, demagogic appeals, or rumors and fears. This was democracy in its most direct form. Thousands of ordinary citizens deciding questions of war and peace, life and death without representatives or filters. It was messy, sometimes irrational, but it was genuine self-government. Political leadership. Despite democratic ideology, certain individuals became influential leaders. Athens had no formal executive, no president or prime minister, but politicians could gain influence through rhetorical skill, military success, family connections, and shrewd political maneuvering. Pericles dominated Athenian politics for decades in the mid-5th century, repeatedly elected strategos and trusted to guide policy.
But he governed by persuasion, not authority. He had to convince the assembly, which could reject his proposals at any time. After Pericles, politics became more factional. Demagogues, literally leaders of the demos, arose, politicians who appealed directly to the people, sometimes with populist policies, sometimes with fear-mongering and scapegoating. Some were genuinely talented leaders, others were irresponsible opportunists. Cleon, a wealthy leather merchant turned politician, was Athens' most controversial demagogue. His critics, including the playwright Aristophanes, portrayed him as vulgar, warmongering, and corrupt. His supporters saw him as a champion of ordinary citizens against elite domination. This tension between democratic ideals and practical realities of leadership was constant. Democracy meant all citizens were equal, but some were more effective at persuasion, had more resources for political activity, or were simply more ambitious. Justice and the courts. Athenian law was complex and surprisingly sophisticated. Many laws were written down and publicly displayed. Citizens were expected to know the law. Ignorance was no excuse. The courts handled both public and private cases. Public cases, graphi, involved crimes against the state, treason, bribery, impiety, etc. Any citizen could bring prosecution, though false accusations could result in severe penalties for the accuser. Private cases, dicai, involved disputes between individuals, property, debt, inheritance, assault, etc. Only the injured party could bring charges. Trials followed a standard procedure. Both sides presented arguments, witnesses testified, evidence was presented, and the jury voted immediately. There was no judge directing the trial or instructing the jury. The jurors were judges of both fact and law. Professional lawyers didn't exist, though wealthy litigants hired logographers, speechwriters, to compose persuasive speeches. Litigants memorized these speeches and delivered them as if spontaneous. Forensic speeches that survive, by orators like Lysias and Demosthenes, are literary masterpieces, full of clever arguments, emotional appeals, and character attacks. Jurors voted by dropping bronze ballots into urns. Solid axle meant guilty, hollow axle meant innocent. Philosophy and intellectual life. The birth of philosophy. Athens became the intellectual center of the Greek world, where philosophy, literally love of wisdom, flourished as never before. Pre-Socratic philosophers had explored questions of cosmology and metaphysics, but in Athens, philosophy turned to human affairs, ethics, politics, epistemology, the nature of the good life. Socrates, the gadfly of Athens. Socrates, 470 to 399 BCE, never wrote anything, but transformed philosophy through his teaching method and personal example. He spent his days in public spaces, the Agora, gymnasia, symposia, engaging anyone willing to talk in philosophical dialogue. His method, the elenchus, cross-examination, involved asking questions to expose contradictions in his interlocutor's beliefs. Someone claims to know what justice is, Socrates asks questions that reveal they don't really know. Someone boasts of their wisdom, Socrates demonstrates their ignorance. This was infuriating. Socrates made enemies among those he embarrassed, especially prominent citizens who resented being shown up by this odd, poor philosopher. His followers, brilliant young men from elite families, sometimes seemed to learn disrespect for tradition and authority rather than wisdom.
In 399 BCE, Socrates was prosecuted for impiety, not believing in the city's gods, introducing new gods, and corrupting the youth. The charges were politically motivated, reflecting backlash against his associates who had been involved in anti-democratic coups. Socrates refused to defend himself conventionally. His speech to the jury, as recorded by Plato, was defiant, claiming his philosophical mission came from the god at Delphi and that he was Athens' greatest benefactor. The jury convicted him, voting for execution by drinking hemlock. Socrates' death made him a martyr for philosophy. He could have escaped into exile, friends had arranged it, but chose to obey Athens' laws even when they condemned him unjustly. His final words, according to Plato, were, "Credo, we owe a cock to Asclepius, pay the debt and don't forget." Even in death, he maintained his piety. Plato, the Academy and Idealism. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, founded the Academy, a philosophical school that would continue for nearly a millennium. Located in a grove outside Athens' walls, the Academy trained students in mathematics, dialectic, and philosophy. Plato's philosophy, preserved in dialogues featuring Socrates as protagonist, was idealist. He argued that the physical world perceived by senses is merely shadow, imperfect copy of eternal, perfect forms or ideas existing in a transcendent realm. True knowledge means grasping these forms through reason, not relying on deceptive sensory experience. His most famous work, The Republic, imagines an ideal city ruled by philosopher kings who understand the form of the good and govern with wisdom and justice. The dialogue examines justice, education, politics, and metaphysics in depth, proposing a radically structured society where children are raised communally, women receive equal education, and private property is abolished for the ruling class. Whether Plato seriously proposed this as a practical program or offered it as philosophical thought experiment remains debated. Either way, the Republic profoundly influenced Western political philosophy. Plato's other dialogues explored many topics: the immortality of the soul, Phaedo, the nature of love, Symposium, the relationship between rhetoric and philosophy, Phaedrus, the problem of knowledge, Theaetetus, and more. His philosophical range and literary artistry made him one of history's most influential thinkers. Aristotle, the Lyceum and Empiricism. Aristotle, 384–322 BCE, came to Athens as a young man to study at Plato's Academy, remaining for 20 years. After Plato's death, Aristotle eventually founded his own school, the Lyceum, in 335 BCE. Aristotle's approach differed from Plato's. Where Plato was idealist, seeking eternal truths beyond the physical world, Aristotle was empiricist, studying the natural world through observation. His works covered astonishing range: biology, physics, metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric, poetics, logic, and more. In biology, Aristotle dissected animals, classified species, described development, and proposed theories of generation. His observations were remarkably accurate, though mixed with errors. His biological works remained authoritative for centuries. His ethics explored the good life, arguing that happiness, eudaimonia, comes from living virtuously according to reason. Virtue is a mean between extremes: courage between cowardice and recklessness, generosity between stinginess and wastefulness. The virtuous person develops good habits through practice until virtue becomes second nature. His politics analyzed different constitutional forms, examining democracy, oligarchy, monarchy, and mixed systems. He collected and studied constitutions from 158 Greek city-states, using empirical data to inform political theory. He famously defined humans as political animals, zoon politikon, naturally suited to living in organized communities. His logic, especially his theory of syllogistic reasoning, provided tools for rigorous argument. His rhetoric analyzed persuasive techniques, making him foundational for rhetorical education. Like Plato, Aristotle's influence extended across centuries and cultures, shaping Islamic, Jewish, and Christian philosophy as well as Western science and philosophy. The Sophists, teachers for hire. The Sophists were itinerant teachers who traveled between cities, offering instruction in rhetoric, argumentation, and various subjects for fees. Major Sophists included Protagoras, Gorgias, Hippias, and Prodicus. Sophists were controversial. Critics, including Plato and other philosophers, accused them of teaching rhetorical tricks rather than truth, of making weak arguments appear strong, of being cynical relativists who denied objective truth and morality. Protagoras' famous maxim, "Man is the measure of all things," seemed to suggest truth was purely subjective. Whatever seems true to each person is true for them. His agnosticism about gods, "Concerning the gods, I cannot say whether they exist or not," seemed impious. Yet Sophists served important functions. In democratic Athens, rhetorical skill was essential for political success. Young men needed education in public speaking, argumentation, and persuasion. Sophists provided this training, though at prices only wealthy families could afford. Some Sophists were serious intellectuals. Protagoras developed sophisticated theories of language and ethics. Gorgias explored rhetoric's philosophical implications. Hippias was a polymath, claiming expertise in mathematics, astronomy, literature, and more. The distinction between sophists and philosophers wasn't always clear. Both engaged in teaching and debate. What separated them was partly method, sophists teaching rhetorical technique versus philosophers seeking truth, partly social position, sophists charging fees versus philosophers teaching freely, and partly self-presentation. Other philosophical schools. Athens hosted other philosophical movements. The Cynics rejected conventional values, arguing that virtue and happiness required abandoning social conventions, possessions, and comforts. Diogenes, the most famous cynic, allegedly lived in a barrel, begged for food, masturbated publicly, and mocked powerful people, all to demonstrate that conventional notions of propriety were meaningless.
When Alexander the Great asked what he could do for him, Diogenes supposedly replied, "Get out of my sunlight." Cynic philosophy was radical social criticism expressed through lifestyle. By voluntarily adopting poverty and shamelessness, cynics challenged assumptions about what constituted a good life. The Cyrenaics, founded by Aristippus, taught hedonism. Pleasure is the highest good. But this wasn't simple self-indulgence. Cyrenaics argued for sophisticated pleasure-seeking that maximized enjoyment while avoiding pain and dependency. These and other schools made Athens a vibrant marketplace of ideas, where competing philosophies vied for adherence and competed for truth. Science and natural philosophy. Philosophical inquiry extended to natural phenomena. Greek thinkers developed surprisingly sophisticated proto-scientific theories. Astronomy. Astronomers proposed that Earth is spherical, calculated its circumference, Aristophanes, explained eclipses, and developed geometric models of planetary motion. Mathematics. Pythagoras and his followers explored number theory and geometry. Euclid's Elements systematized geometry, remaining the standard textbook for 2 millennia. Medicine. The Hippocratic school developed naturalistic explanations of disease, rejecting supernatural causation. Hippocratic physicians observed symptoms carefully, recorded case histories, and developed treatments based on empirical experience. Physics. Philosophers proposed atomic theories, Democritus, theories of 4 elements, Empedocles, and various cosmologies attempting to explain the universe's structure and origins. These investigations mixed genuine insight with speculation and error, but they established methods of rational inquiry and empirical observation that would eventually develop into modern science. Intellectual life and literacy. Despite Athens' intellectual achievements, literacy remained limited. Perhaps 10 to 30% of citizens could read and write with any facility. Elite education emphasized oral culture, memorizing poetry, speaking eloquently, debating skillfully. Writing was a tool, but not the primary medium of high culture.
Books existed, but were expensive and rare. They were papyrus scrolls, laboriously copied by hand, vulnerable to damage. Libraries were small private collections. The library at Alexandria, in Egypt, founded after our period, would be the ancient world's greatest, but Athens had no comparable public collection. Intellectual life centered on oral teaching and discussion. Philosophers taught through dialogue, not by assigning readings. Plays and poetry were performed, not read silently. Even prose works were typically read aloud to audiences. This oral culture shaped intellectual practices. Arguments needed to be memorable and persuasive when heard once, not intricate constructions requiring close study. Rhetorical skill, the ability to speak effectively, was more valued than literary skill. Yet writing's influence was growing. By the 4th century, written legal codes, philosophical treatises, medical texts, and histories circulated more widely. Literacy rates were rising, the balance was shifting, though oral culture would remain dominant for centuries.
Only citizens of moderate or greater wealth could afford it, making hoplite service both military duty and class marker. Hoplite warfare. Hoplites fought in dense formations, the phalanx, where discipline and cohesion were everything. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears projecting forward, creating a bristling wall of bronze and wood. A typical phalanx was 8 ranks deep, though this varied. The front ranks did most of the fighting. Rear ranks pushed forward, maintaining pressure and replacing casualties. The phalanx advanced steadily toward the enemy, singing paeans, battle hymns, maintaining formation. When 2 phalanxes collided, the result was brutal and chaotic. Men stabbed with spears, trying to find openings in enemy armor. The pushing, otismus, was intense, thousands of men shoving against each other, the back ranks pushing the front ranks forward. Men stumbled, fell, were trampled. The noise was overwhelming. Clashing metal, men shouting, wounded screaming. Battles were usually decided quickly. One phalanx would break, men fleeing in panic. The victors pursued briefly, killing those they caught, but lengthy pursuits were impossible in heavy armor. Most casualties occurred during the rout, when fleeing soldiers dropped shields and ran, vulnerable to pursuing enemies. This style of warfare required courage and discipline. Breaking ranks meant exposing oneself and one's neighbors to danger. Men fought for their city, their comrades, and their honor. Cowardice was deeply shameful. Soldiers who fled might be socially ostracized or legally penalized. The navy and maritime power. Athens' real military strength lay in its navy, the fleet of triremes, warships with 3 banks of oars, that made Athens the dominant naval power in the Aegean. A trireme was a technological marvel, about 35 meters long, powered by 170 rowers arranged in 3 levels, capable of speeds up to 9 knots. The ship's bronze-sheathed ram could hull enemy vessels, sinking them or rendering them unable to fight. Naval warfare required different skills than hoplite warfare. Rowers needed stamina, coordination, and discipline. All 170 oars had to move in perfect synchronization. Helmsmen needed expertise to maneuver these long, unstable vessels. Marines, soldiers who boarded enemy ships, needed courage to fight on rocking, crowded decks. Athens' navy was democratic in a way hoplite forces weren't. Rowers were drawn from the poorest citizens, the Thetes, who couldn't afford hoplite equipment but could row. Naval service gave them political voice. They fought for Athens and expected representation in return. This connection between naval power and democracy was explicit. Themistocles, who championed naval development in the 480s, understood that a strong fleet empowered ordinary citizens. The navy defeated Persia at Salamis, secured Athens' maritime empire, and gave the city its power, making the Thetes who rowed indispensable to Athens' success. Military training. Citizens began military training in boyhood. Physical education in gymnasia prepared bodies for war's demands. Young men practiced with weapons, learned formation fighting, and developed the physical fitness and mental discipline warfare required. At 18, young men entered the ephebia, 2 years of formal military training.
Ephebes trained intensively with weapons, practiced tactical movements, learned to maintain equipment, and stood guard at Attica's fortifications. They also received civic education, learning Athens' laws and constitution, visiting sacred sites, and taking oaths to defend the city. The Epibeke Oath captures military service's civic dimension. I will not disgrace these sacred arms, nor abandon my comrade, wherever I am stationed. I will fight for things sacred and profane, both alone and with all. I will hand down my fatherland not lessened, but greater and better than I received it. After completing the ephebeia, young men became full citizens, liable for military service until age 60. Call-ups for hoplites, or conscription for rowers, brought men to service as needed. Athens was frequently at war, so many men served multiple campaigns. Campaigns and campaign life. Military campaigns were seasonal, typically occurring in summer when weather was favorable and crops had been harvested, freeing farmers for military service. Campaigns were usually short, weeks or months, not years, because citizen soldiers needed to return home. On campaign, soldiers lived rough. They carried rations, barley meal, wine, dried fish, cheese, supplemented by foraging or local purchases. They slept in tents or under the stars. Hygiene was minimal, disease common. Many campaigns saw more deaths from disease than combat. The psychological experience varied. Some soldiers loved the adventure, camaraderie, and glory. Others endured it as grim duty. Battle was terrifying. Even experienced veterans felt fear facing enemy phalanxes or naval engagements. Casualties could be horrific. Battles might kill hundreds or thousands in minutes. The wounded faced grim prospects. Ancient medicine could treat some injuries, setting broken bones, stitching wounds, extracting arrows, but serious wounds often meant death from infection or blood loss. Disabled veterans returned home to uncertain futures, though Athens did provide some support, small pensions for the severely disabled. Mercenaries and professional soldiers. By the 4th century, professional mercenaries increasingly supplemented citizen armies. Some Athenians made military service their career, fighting for pay year-round. Others hired themselves to foreign powers. Greek mercenaries fought across the Mediterranean and beyond, serving Persia, Egypt, and various Greek states. This professionalization both strengthened armies, professional soldiers were more skilled and experienced than citizen militias, and weakened civic militarism. When warfare became a job for professionals, citizens felt less personally invested. The debate between citizen militia and professional army raised philosophical questions about citizenship, virtue, and power. Was a city strongest when all citizens bore arms, or when specialists fought? Did military service build virtue and civic commitment, or was it merely a job like any other?
Festivals and celebrations. The festival calendar. Athens' year was structured around religious festivals, which numbered in the dozens. Some were neighborhood celebrations, others involved the entire city. Some were solemn and austere, others joyous and exuberant. Major festivals included the Panathenaea. Held every summer, late July, early August, the Panathenaea honored Athena, the city's patron goddess. Every 4th year, the Great Panathenaea included expanded festivities and competitions. The festival featured athletic competitions, running, wrestling, boxing, pancration, pentathlon, horse races. Winners received valuable prizes: olive oil in special amphorae, Panathenaic amphorae, distinctive vessels showing Athena on one side and the competition on the other. Musical and poetic competitions. Rhapsodes recited Homer, musicians performed, poets competed. Cultural achievements were celebrated alongside physical prowess. The procession. The festival climaxed with a grand procession from Athens to the Acropolis. The entire citizen body participated. Cavalry, chariots, hoplites in armor, elders carrying olive branches, young women carrying ritual objects, animals for sacrifice, and prominently, a new peplos woven for Athena's ancient wooden statue. The peplos was spectacular, woven by selected young women, a rephoroi, dyed purple, decorated with scenes of Athena's battles. It was carried on a ship cart with mast and rigging, symbolically sailing through Athens.
The Parthenon's frieze immortalizes this procession in marble. At the Acropolis, the peplos was ceremonially placed on Athena Polia's statue. Massive sacrifices followed: a hecatomb, 100 oxen, and many other animals. The meat was distributed and consumed in huge communal feasts. Rich and poor, citizen and metic, ate together, united in honoring their goddess. The city Dionysia. Held in early spring, this festival honored Dionysus with dramatic competitions, which were the origin of Western theater. Preparations began months earlier. Playwrights submitted trilogies, 3 tragedies plus a satyr play, or comedies. A magistrate selected which would be performed. Wealthy citizens served as choragooi, financing production of the choruses. Intense rehearsals prepared actors and choruses. The festival began with a grand procession. The ancient wooden statue of Dionysus was carried from his temple to a shrine outside the city, then brought back ceremoniously, reenacting the god's arrival in Athens. Bulls were sacrificed, wine flowed freely. Then came the theatrical performances. 3 days of tragedies, 3 playwrights each presenting their tetralogy, 1 day of comedies. All performances were competitive. Judges awarded first, second, and third prizes to playwrights, actors, and choragooi. Attending was civic dignity and pleasure. Citizens watched plays exploring profound moral questions, experiencing catharsis through tragedy's pity and fear, and release through comedy's laughter. The festival combined religious devotion, civic pride, artistic excellence, and communal bonding. The Eleusinian Mysteries. These secretive initiation rites occurred at Eleusis, about 20 kilometers from Athens, during autumn. The mysteries promised initiates blessed afterlife, making them popular across Greek world. The festival began in Athens with purification rituals at the sea. Initiates, Midday, then walked in procession to Eleusis along the sacred way, singing and dancing. At Eleusis, they underwent secret rites in the Telesterion, Hall of Initiation. What happened in the mysteries remains mysterious. Initiates swore never to reveal them, and they kept their oaths. Ancient writers hint at visions of light, sacred objects revealed, words spoken, experiences that transformed participants spiritually. Many claimed initiation was life's most important experience. The mysteries crossed social boundaries. Slaves could be initiated, one of the few religious contexts where they participated equally with citizens. Women were fully included. The mysteries offered something civic religion didn't: personal salvation, direct encounter with divine, promise of happiness after death. The Thesmophoria. This women-only festival honored Demeter and her daughter Persephone, goddesses of agriculture and fertility. Men were strictly excluded. Married women left their homes for 3 days, camping together at a sanctuary. They fasted, performed secret rites involving sacrifice and purification, and engaged in aishkrology, ritual obscenity, telling dirty jokes and stories, believed to promote fertility. The festival gave women rare autonomy and community. Away from male supervision, women bonded, reinforced female networks, and experienced solidarity. The rite's secrecy paralleled the mysteries, but was enforced by women themselves, not state authority. The Thesmophoria was also an agrarian festival, performed before fall plowing to ensure good harvests. The connection between women's fertility and agricultural fertility was explicit. Both were Demeter's domain. Other major festivals. The Anthesteria, February. 3-day Dionysus festival involving wine-drinking contests, flower offerings, and remembering the dead. 1 day, pots of food were left for ghosts. Then the living told them, "Out, Charis, the Anthesteria is over." The Thargelia, May. Apollo and Artemis festival including choral competitions. It also featured the Pharmakos ritual. A scapegoat, usually a criminal or ugly person, was driven from the city, symbolically carrying away pollution and bad luck. The Apatoria, October. Phratry, kinship group, festival where fathers registered sons as members, confirming their citizenship. This was crucial for maintaining citizenship roles. The Dionysia ta Katagros, Rural Dionysus, December. Village festivals with processions, phallic symbols, Dionysus was a fertility god, and dramatic performances in local theaters. Countless smaller festivals filled the year. Altogether, perhaps 60 to 70 days annually involved festival activities. Add in personal celebrations, births, weddings, funerals, and religious observance occupied substantial time and resources. The social functions of festivals. Festivals served many purposes beyond religious devotion. Social cohesion. Shared participation reinforced community bonds. Citizens acting together in ritual expressed and strengthened collective identity. Entertainment. Festivals broke the monotony of daily life, providing spectacle, music, drama, feasting, and fun. Display. Elite citizens demonstrated wealth and piety through sponsoring choruses, providing expensive sacrifices, and funding festival elements. Economic. Festivals stimulated economic activity. Food, wine, animals for sacrifice, ritual objects, gifts, all required purchase, benefiting vendors and craftsmen. Political. Major festivals brought citizens together, facilitating political networking and informal decision-making. Gender roles. Festivals reinforced and sometimes temporarily suspended normal gender roles. Women's festivals gave them rare authority. Men's festivals excluded women, reinforcing male bonding. The festival calendar structured Athenian life as much as the political calendar or agricultural seasons. One could hardly separate religious from civic from social life, all intertwined in the rhythm of festivals marking the year. Architecture and urban planning. The Acropolis and sacred architecture. The Acropolis, high city, dominated Athens physically and symbolically. This rocky outcrop, crowned with temples and monuments, announced Athens' power, piety, and cultural achievement to all who saw it. The Parthenon, 447 to 432 BCE, was the centerpiece. This Doric temple, designed by Ictinus and Callicratus with sculpture by Phidias, represents the pinnacle of classical architecture. Every proportion was carefully calculated. The columns bulge slightly, entasis, to correct optical illusions that would make straight columns appear concave. The floor curves gently upward toward the center. Corner columns are slightly thicker because they appear thinner against sky. These refinements created optical perfection. The Parthenon sculptural program was equally magnificent. The pediments, triangular ends, showed Athena's birth and her contest with Poseidon for Athens' patronage. The metaposts, square panels, depicted mythological battles. The frieze showed the Panathenaid procession. These sculptures, now scattered in museums, controversially, were originally painted in bright colors that have faded away. Inside stood Phidias's chrysolamphatine Athena Parthenos, 12 meters tall, covered in gold, 40 to 44 talents worth, and ivory. The goddess wore full armor, held victory in one hand, shield in the other. The shield's exterior showed a Mazonomachy, battle with Amazons, inside Gigantomachy, giants fighting gods. The statue's base depicted Pandora's creation. This was art as theology. Every detail communicated meaning about Athena, Athens, and cosmic order. Other Acropolis buildings included the Erechtheion, 420 to 406 BCE, elegant Ionic temple housing ancient cults. Its caryatid porch, where sculpted women serve as columns, is hauntingly beautiful. The Propylaea, 437 to 432 BCE, monumental gateway to the Acropolis with columns, porches, and a picture gallery. The Temple of Athena Nike, 427 to 424 BCE, small jewel-like temple celebrating military victories. Together, these buildings created sacred landscape proclaiming Athens' glory. They were expensive, funded partly by tribute from subject cities, and deliberately magnificent, embodying Athens' imperial ambitions and democratic pride. Civic architecture. Beyond sacred architecture, Athens developed impressive civic buildings. The Stoa of Zeus Eleutherios and Stoa Poikilae in the Agora provided shaded public space. The Poikilae's painted panels depicted mythological and historical battles, including Marathon, art as civic memory and propaganda.
The tholos, circular building, and bouleuterion, council house, facilitated democratic governance, providing meeting spaces for officials and council. The Theater of Dionysus accommodated 15,000-plus spectators, its design ensuring excellent acoustics and sightlines, engineering serving art and religion. The Pompeion stored equipment for processions and festivals, making religious spectacle possible. These buildings weren't just functional, they embodied democratic values. Magnificent public architecture contrasted with modest private homes. Citizens invested collectively in public spaces while living privately in relative simplicity. This reflected democratic ideology. The community, not individuals, deserved monumental architecture. Domestic architecture. In the fading light along the Acropolis walls, the city bathes in a final rose gold. Ancient marble turns the color of honey and wine. The Parthenon's columns glimmer as evening breezes scatter olive leaves. An older citizen might take this moment for a quiet stroll. He walks near the ancient temple of Hephaestus, still astonishingly intact on its hill. Indeed, one of the most complete temples that survives from those days. Knowing the Greek gods have watched over Athens for eons. Below him, tile roofs glow softly, and far-off temple bells toll. Private houses were modest, turning inward with blank walls facing streets. The typical house organized around a central courtyard, often with a colonnade providing shade. Rooms opened onto the courtyard rather than the street. Privacy was paramount. Houses had distinct male and female spaces. The andron, men's room, was where Symposia occurred, located on the ground floor near the entrance. The gynaikeon, women's quarters, was typically upstairs or in a rear area, separated from male spaces. Construction was simple: stone foundations, mud brick walls, wooden beams, tile roofs. Interiors were plain: plastered walls, sometimes painted, floors of packed earth or simple tiles. Furniture was minimal: couches, stools, chests, a few tables. Wealthier homes were larger and better appointed, but followed the same basic plan. Even rich Athenians lived relatively modestly by later standards. Roman aristocrats, for instance, would build far more elaborate residences. This modest domestic architecture wasn't poverty, but ideology. Athens was democratic. Ostentation was suspect. Citizens should contribute to public magnificence, not display private wealth excessively. The ideal citizen lived comfortably, but not luxuriously, directing resources towards city rather than personal aggrandizement. Urban planning, or lack thereof. Athens lacked systematic urban planning. The city grew organically, houses and streets added wherever needed. Streets were narrow, winding, unpaved, nothing like later planned cities with grid patterns. This created a maze-like urban fabric. Visitors could easily get lost. Neighborhoods had no clear boundaries or organization. Public buildings clustered in certain areas, Acropolis, Agora, but residential areas were jumbled. Why no planning? Partly historical accident. Athens grew gradually over centuries. Partly democratic values. The city didn't want to impose top-down control on where citizens built. Partly practicality. The terrain was hilly and irregular, making grid patterns difficult. Later Greek cities, especially colonies, used grid planning, showing Greeks could plan cities rationally. Athens simply never did, resulting in charming chaos rather than rational order. Infrastructure. Despite lack of overall planning, Athens developed impressive infrastructure. Water supply. Aqueducts, fountain houses, and wells provided water. The Pisistrated Aqueduct, 6th century, brought spring water from Mount Hymettus. Multiple fountain houses distributed water throughout the city. Fortifications. Walls surrounded Athens and Piraeus. The long walls connected city to port, creating a secure corridor. These fortifications were massive engineering projects, requiring thousands of workers and substantial investment. Roads. Within Attica, roads connected Athens to dems, villages, and to neighboring regions. The sacred way to Eleusis was especially important. Roads were unpaved but maintained, with bridges over streams and markers indicating distances.
Port facilities. Piraeus had extensive harbor works, ship sheds, storing triremes, warehouses, commercial facilities. The port was planned more systematically than Athens itself, with grid street pattern. This infrastructure enabled Athens functioning as major city and naval power. Water supply sustained large population. Fortifications provided security. Roads facilitated commerce and military movements. Port facilities supported maritime empire. Agriculture and rural life. Most Athenians lived not in the urban center, but in rural dems, villages, scattered across Attica. These farmers formed the backbone of Athenian citizenship, though their lives differed markedly from urban citizens. Attica's landscape was beautiful but challenging. Mountains ringed the coastal plain. Soil was thin and rocky, good for olives and grapes, but marginal for grain. Water was scarce in summer. Farmers coaxed livings from this harsh land through skill, hard work, and intimate knowledge of their terrain. The agricultural year. Farming was starchier than many modern diets, though monotonous and sometimes insufficient in quantity. The poor, especially in times of grain shortage, might suffer genuine hunger. Athenian democracy included provisions for distributing grain to citizens during shortages, but these were inadequate for preventing all hunger. Foreign residents and slaves had no such protections and might starve when harvests failed or ships didn't arrive. Food preparation and cooking. Cooking was done over open fires on the household hearth or in outdoor ovens. Kitchens as separate rooms were rare. Cooking occurred in the main living area or in the courtyard. Cooking methods were simple: boiling in clay pots, roasting on spits, baking in clay ovens, frying in olive oil in shallow pans. Fuel, wood or charcoal, was expensive, so cooks learned to prepare meals efficiently, maximizing food while minimizing fuel use. Women and slaves did most cooking, though men might cook for themselves when necessary. Cooking wasn't considered a prestigious activity. No celebrity chefs existed, but skill in preparing appetizing meals from limited ingredients was valued. Preservation of food was critical in the absence of refrigeration. Techniques included drying, figs, fish, salting, fish, meat, smoking, fish, meat, preserving in oil, olives, cheese, and storing in cool, dark places, root vegetables, grain. Every household maintained stores against winter and crop failures. Conclusion: the legacy of Athens. The end of an era. The Athens we have explored, the Athens of the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, was never static. It grew, changed, struggled, and eventually declined. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, devastated Athens, ending its empire and weakening its power. The 4th century saw partial recovery, but also increasing Macedonian dominance. Philip II of Macedon conquered Greece in 338 BCE. His son Alexander the Great shifted the Greek world center eastward. By the Hellenistic period, 323 to 31 BCE, Athens remained culturally significant, but was no longer a major political or military power. Its philosophical schools continued teaching. Its dramatic traditions survived. Its architectural monuments still inspired. But the days of democratic empire were gone. Roman conquest, 146 BCE, further diminished Athens. Under Roman rule, it became a provincial city, famous for its past glories and philosophical schools, but no longer shaping world events. The ancient gods were eventually displaced by Christianity. The Parthenon became a church, then a mosque, then a ruin, when Venetian artillery exploded a Turkish powder magazine stored inside in 1687. What Athens gave the world? Yet Athens' legacy endured and continues to shape Western civilization. Democracy. The idea that ordinary people can govern themselves, that political power legitimately comes from citizens rather than kings or aristocrats, this revolutionary concept, though imperfectly realized in Athens, inspired democratic movements across millennia. Philosophy. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle established philosophical traditions that still structure Western thought. Questions they asked about justice, knowledge, reality, ethics, and politics remain fundamental. Drama. Greek tragedy and comedy created theatrical traditions exploring human nature, moral dilemmas, and social criticism that continue in modern theater, film, and literature. Historical consciousness. Herodotus and Thucydides, Athenian or Athenian-influenced historians, established traditions of historical inquiry, critical analysis of sources, and understanding causation that undergird modern historical study. Architecture. The Parthenon and other classical buildings established aesthetic principles, proportion, harmony, balance that influenced architecture across cultures and centuries. Neoclassical buildings worldwide attest to this continuing influence. Scientific inquiry. The Greek tradition of rational investigation of natural phenomena, though mixed with error and speculation, established methodological principles that eventually developed into modern science. Literary excellence. Homer's epics, Greek lyric poetry, philosophical dialogues, and historical works set literary standards for complexity, beauty, and intellectual depth that remain touchstones. The human dimension. Beyond these monumental achievements, Athens reminds us of universal human experiences. The Athenian mother nursing her baby, the craftsman proud of his work, the farmer anxiously watching the sky for rain, the youth wrestling in the gymnasium, the old man watching sunset from the Acropolis, these are recognizably human despite the vast temporal and cultural distance. Athens shows us a society struggling with eternal questions. How should we live together? What is justice? How do we balance individual freedom and collective good? What makes life meaningful? How do we face suffering and death? The Athenians' answers differed from ours, but the questions remain the same. Their daily lives, the routines of work, family, worship, celebration, and rest, remind us that even in history's most famous civilizations, most people lived ordinary lives. The glory of the Parthenon was built by anonymous masons. The victories at Marathon and Salamis were won by farmers and fishermen fighting as hoplites and rowers. Philosophy flourished because countless unnamed teachers passed knowledge to students. Democracy functioned because ordinary citizens attended assembly meetings and served on juries. Limitations and shadows. We must not romanticize Athens. Its democracy excluded most people, women, slaves, foreigners. Its treatment of slaves, especially in the mines, was brutal. Its imperialism subjugated other Greeks. Its culture could be xenophobic, misogynistic, and violent. Socrates was executed for philosophy. Countless people suffered and died in wars driven by Athenian ambition. Yet, acknowledging these failures doesn't negate the achievements. Athens was a human society with all humanity's mix of nobility and baseness, wisdom and folly, beauty and cruelty. Studying Athens means confronting this complexity, celebrating what was admirable while recognizing what was deplorable, learning from both successes and failures. The eternal return to Athens. Each generation returns to classical Athens, finding new meanings and drawing new lessons. The Renaissance recovered classical learning, using Athens as model for human-centered culture. The Enlightenment looked to Athens for rational inquiry and democratic ideals. The Romantic era found in Greek culture a lost golden age of beauty and harmony. Modern democracies invoke Athens as founding precedent. Each interpretation reveals as much about the interpreters as about Athens itself. We see in Athens what we seek: democracy or imperialism, rational philosophy or mythic consciousness, aesthetic perfection or human struggle, enlightened civilization or slave-owning patriarchy. The truth is, Athens was all these things. It was complex, contradictory, endlessly fascinating. By studying daily life, how people actually lived, worked, loved, worshipped, argued, and died, we access something more authentic than monuments and famous names. We touch the lived reality of people who, like us, navigated the challenges of human existence, creating meaning from ordinary days, building something larger than themselves through collective effort. A final image. Night has settled over Athens. The Acropolis glimmers faintly under stars. The city sleeps, its thousands of inhabitants resting before tomorrow's labors. In the darkness, the marble temples seem almost luminous, monuments to human aspiration toward beauty, order, and transcendence. But tomorrow morning, when dawn breaks again, it will not be the temples that matter most. It will be the mother rising to nurse her baby, the baker lighting his oven, the potter sitting at his wheel, the teacher gathering students, the farmer walking to his field, the assembly convening to debate the city's future. It will be the countless ordinary actions of ordinary people collectively creating the extraordinary phenomenon that was Athens. This is the truest legacy, not that Athens produced great philosophers and magnificent buildings, though it did, but that it showed human beings creating civilization together, day by day, through countless small acts of work, creativity, cooperation, and aspiration. In their daily lives, the Athenians built something that outlasted them, something that speaks to us across 2,500 years, the possibility of human flourishing through collective effort, rational thought, artistic beauty, and self-governance. Tomorrow, with the dawn, it will begin again, another full, quiet day in Athens, shaped by the rhythm of the sun and the heartbeat of the polis. And though that Athens is long vanished, its spirit lives on wherever people gather to think, create, govern themselves, and build lives of meaning and dignity.